Chapter 261, Preparing to Return to the Blue Star. Damien stepped off the deck of the space battleship and was met by Kyle and Renoli. The two hurried over, anticipation bright in their eyes. "Kyle, Renoli, how's the wormhole jump project coming along?" Damien asked. Kyle exchanged a quick look with Renoli before replying, "We ran into some snags at first that we couldn't solve on our own, but with the research data and technical expertise Alex secured from our allies on Mowgli Planet, we finally broke through after about a year of work." Renoli added, "All the tests have been completed too. Now it's just a matter of scaling up production." Damien allowed himself a pleased smile, but he knew better than to take all the credit. If Alex hadn't arranged for top-tier talent, specialized equipment, and those crucial research files, developing a reliable wormhole engine from scratch would have taken decades, maybe even a century, if we'd hit major roadblocks. The data Alex provided represents the very key to reaching the core of the universe, a level of knowledge no civilization shares lightly. Such breakthroughs only surface when monumental alliances and mutual benefits are at stake. With the technology proven and production imminent, Damien felt the weight of possibility settle in his chest. Soon, the Blue Star would no longer be just a distant dream, it would be their next home. Alex had delivered it to Damien in person. Given Alex's absolute loyalty to the Void God cult, it was obvious how highly he valued its artifacts. Damien, having witnessed that fanatical devotion firsthand, earned Alex's trust, and in return, Alex agreed to help him complete his research. If Lix now considers Damien an enemy, there's no doubt she'll spare no effort to eliminate him. "Have you told Alex the news?" Renoli asked. Renoli didn't seem surprised that Damien had finished his work with Alex's support. After all, Damien's homeworld, Blue Star, had not yet reached the interstellar age on its own. Without external aid, the planet could only advance through its own painstaking efforts. Over generations, one brilliant mind built on another's discoveries, slowly accumulating the breakthroughs needed. Only then could Blue Star finally break into the ranks of interstellar civilizations and begin to engage with other societies across the universe. Blue Star had always been home to remarkable minds, but none more so than Damien. He had already journeyed into the unknown reaches of space and achieved a breakthrough that would forever alter his world's place among the stars. Renoli, who had been working closely with him, was certain that before long, Damien would unlock the secret to propelling Blue Star fully into the interstellar age. "I'd love to share the news in person," Damien said, his eyes bright with excitement, "but it's not necessary. Once I confirmed my calculations, I sent the results to my fellow researchers. They've already passed everything along to Alex." Sure enough, on a distant, monster-haunted planet, Alex stood atop a jagged peak that glowed like a beacon of red flame against the dark horizon. He held a crystal tablet in his hand, and a broad smile split his face as he read the latest report from his homeland. "The margin of error is under 10,000 miles, Alex announced to the winds. Lord Cassidin's verdict was absolutely right. Hearing that Damien had won the great Void God's favor filled Alex with pride. He'd even persuaded Miss Sonia to erect a cutting-edge laboratory on Alex's home world specifically for Damien's use, clear proof that the Void God's endorsement carried immense weight. Now, with Damien's calculations validated and Cassidin's support firmly behind him, the two friends were one decisive step closer to ushering Blue Star into a new era among the stars. Damien had only recently come into contact with Tony Stark, but he'd quickly seen the genius philanthropist for what he truly was, a good man. Eager to support Tony's work, Damien threw himself into helping accelerate Stark's research, doing everything he could to advance the fledgling Void cult. When Tony achieved a major breakthrough, Damien was among the first to congratulate him, but rather than storm back to Void Island in celebration, he paused at the foot of Mount Lix. There, a suffocating darkness spread like ink over the landscape, swallowing every ray of light. From its depths came the blood-curdling screams of monstrous creatures, ugly, tortured wails that set Damien's teeth on edge. He knew Lord Cassidin harbored no desire to conquer other worlds. His vision for the Void cult lay in spiritual transcendence, not political domination. Still, any burgeoning power must guard against enemies. Complacency invited attack. Damien was no Tony Stark. His talents lay not in inventing revolutionary engines of creation, but in honing his own body and spirit. If he could not match Stark's brilliance in the lab, he could at least forge himself into a living weapon, ready to strike down anyone foolish enough to threaten Lord Cassadin's honor. With that resolve steeling his heart, he pressed on into the darkness, determined to become the shield and sword the Void cult so desperately needed. Xandar System, Void Island. I'll brief Miss Sonia first. Then we can go over everything at tonight's celebration banquet. After exchanging a few words with Renoli and the others, Tony set off for the villa atop the mountain. Sonia, expecting that he would bring good news for Lord Cassadine, slipped into a proper, dignified outfit before his arrival. The moment he appeared at the door, she greeted him with a bright smile. "Mr. Tony," she said, "you look as if you've got good news to report." Tony returned her smile. Space jump research is finally complete for now. It may not be the most advanced system out there, but it's ready for market. As for producing space battleships independently, once we secure the necessary funding and build the factories, we can put that plan into action. Sonia's eyes lit up at the announcement. "Thank you for all your hard work, Mr. Tony." She could hardly contain her excitement now that her wormhole jump technology was about to go on sale. "It was my pleasure," she replied with a modest nod. "This is exactly what I set out to study," Damien said. "Tomorrow, I'll organize all the programs I've developed into a detailed list so the supervisors can check for any production errors. Miss Sonia, please recruit the right people to help, then report back to me." Tony waved his hand dismissively. "Leave it to me." Sonia nodded, and Tony made his way to the lounge, where Damien was waiting. He sank into a plush sofa with no ceremony. "Now that you've got your results," he said, "you look a lot more relaxed." Damien smiled and stretched his arms. "I wouldn't claim I'm completely stress-free, but this does ease a huge weight off my shoulders. I've been on Xandar for more than a year. With the research wrapped up, I'm looking forward to going home and seeing Pepper." Tony leaned back, grinning. "You've done the hardest part. Next comes the step-by-step production process. If everything goes smoothly, you'll be back on Blue Star with Pepper in no time." Damien stepped off the transport and onto the dusty surface of Xandar. In the blink of an eye, more than a year had slipped past on desolate Void Island. Months he'd scarcely noticed while pouring himself into his work and chasing new thrills across the galaxy. Yet no matter how busy or excited he was, he still had to keep Pepper's moods in check. Xandar itself was breathtaking, so full of opportunity and promise, but Tony couldn't shake his unease about the enigmatic Blue Star outpost. As Damien settled in, the second status update pinged across Tony's console. Progress was good, but questions remained. Chapter 262, All Are Equal Before the Decrees. "You ought to go back and take a look," Tony Stark warned, his tone sharper than before. Damien paused in the workshop doorway. "I was only planning to swing by and see Pepper," he said. "You said things were calm on Blue Star again?" Tony, who'd been lounging at his workbench moments ago, snapped upright. His voice rose with barely contained urgency. "Nothing's going to be peaceful on Blue Star. Not for long. There's going to be an emergence of a relic every bit as potent as the cosmic cube." He leaned forward, eyes blazing. "And whenever an artifact of that magnitude shows itself, it pulls in every scavenger and warlord in the galaxy." Damien frowned, but he understood the tension in Tony's voice. Preparing to face Thanos had already stretched Stark Technologies to its limits, and now this. He uncrossed his arms and asked, "Are you saying these cube-level treasures belong to All-Father Odin?" "Exactly," Tony snapped. "They're Odin's property, but they've been hidden on Blue Star this whole time." Damien let the information settle. He nodded once, slowly. Whatever peace Blue Star might have promised was slipping away, and they would have to be ready. Damien leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "The Reality Stone is in fact one of Odin's treasures. He sealed it here on Earth ages ago." Tony frowned. If it really belonged to the All-Father, how did he lose it? Why didn't he simply reclaim it for himself? A faint smile curved Damien's lips. "The Nine Realms were Odin's domain long before he ever hid the stone here. There's no recycling. It was always his." Tony's shoulders tightened, uncertainty flickering in his gaze. Sensing his friend's unease, Damien placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Relax. It's only a hiccup. Once we secure the stone, everything will be fine." But Damien's expression sobered as he recalled their last confrontation in New York. "We managed to contain the damage as much as possible," he said quietly. "Yet still, too many civilians perished." Tony clenched his fists. An alien invasion is a nightmare scenario for the average person on Earth. He lifted his head, resolve shining in his eyes. "That's precisely why I'm so determined to propel Earth into the interstellar age. We need to be strong, so the next time invaders come knocking, we won't just survive. We'll be ready to fight back." It's all too common across the stars. When gods clash, mortals end up paying the price. Even if the powerful refrain from wreaking havoc themselves, disasters on Blue Star never cease. Your strength is remarkable, but you can't shield everyone. Damien's voice dropped to a calm murmur. "Don't burden yourself with impossible expectations, or you risk falling into the abyss of desire." Tony blinked, unsettled. He'd been teetering on the edge of a plan, an elaborate shortcut to magnify his power as fast as possible, to protect everything he cared about. Damien's words felt like a wake-up call, pulling his thoughts back from that dangerous precipice. "Thank you," Tony whispered. Damien offered a small, encouraging smile. "Tony, you're exceptionally gifted, and your mind is sharp. But remember, once you set foot on that path of shortcuts, there's no turning back." "You've done the Void Cult a great service," Damien began, his voice steady. "After all your evolutions, your power ranks among our very best. But remember this. If you ever succumb to base desire and break the commandments, no matter how highly I regard you, I will, not hesitate, I will end you. Our precepts apply equally to every member." Tony's chest tightened at the warning. Still, he bowed his head. "I understand, Master Damien." Damien studied him for a long moment, then continued, "Even someone of your caliber, unless you attain true omnipotence, will always carry some regret." Tony swallowed. "Master Damien, you've grown so strong yourself. Do you have any regrets?" Sonia glanced at Damien, concern in her eyes. Damien met her gaze, reflected silently, then spoke evenly. "Not at this moment. Perhaps in the future. But as of now, I have none. I've already accomplished everything I set out to do." He shook his head once, decisively. "No regrets." Damien paused, the years ahead stretching out like an uncharted sea. He wouldn't pretend he'd never face decisions that might one day haunt him, recognizing his own vulnerability was too important. "You're right," he said quietly. "I understand." Tony's eyes brightened at that admission. He let out a low chuckle. "Then let's celebrate. I'll throw a party. Treat Kyle and the others to a proper feast." He regarded Damien with the same awe so many on Blue Star felt, the illusion of effortless fame and fortune. What they didn't see was the burden Damien carried. If he failed to stop the enemy on the horizon, the guilt would be his alone. Despite Damien's seemingly boundless strength, only he knew the doubts he kept locked inside. "Sounds perfect," Tony said, relief softening his features. Damien offered a small, genuine smile, glad to see Tony's tension slip away. With a nod, Tony turned and strode from the villa, leaving Damien alone with Sonia once more. Sunlight spilled across the polished floorboards. The quiet that settled between them was almost heavy. Sonia hesitated, then met Damien's gaze. "Sir." Damien watched Mr. Tony's escort vanish into the corridor before turning back to Sonia. "Do you still plan to visit Blue Star in a few days?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, I'll go there and stay for a while once everything here is settled." Sonia offered a reassuring smile. "If you need anything, just contact me." Damien didn't hesitate. "Thank you. In the meantime, I'll keep a close eye on Void Island while you're away, Mr. Cassadin." Sonia knew better than to ask him to delay his departure any further. He had pressing matters elsewhere, so she simply replied, "I appreciate your confidence in me, Mr. Cassadin." His expression softened. He fully trusted Sonia's skills. "Hearing that from you makes me confident, too. I'll let you get on with your preparations." With a nod, Sonia set to work. First on her list, gathering every scrap of information she could find on the people involved in space tech production. Mr. Tony hadn't yet supplied her with a complete roster, but she preferred to begin the groundwork herself. After all, drafting laypeople who knew nothing of the field wouldn't accomplish much. And that concluded the third update. Chapter 263. It doesn't matter if anyone dies. After 3 days of non-celebration, the festivities at Stark Enterprises finally wound down. On the evening of the fourth day, Tony Stark invited Sonia to a private dinner in his high-tech penthouse. Over courses of truffle risotto and aged Merlot, he laid out the full scope of their next endeavor, a working space wormhole jump engine. Tony began by detailing the human resources they'd need: quantum physicists specializing in extra-dimensional topology, engineers experienced with exawatt-level power systems, and cryptographers to lock down their discoveries. He specified every piece of equipment required: superconducting coils calibrated to submillimeter precision, graviton stabilizers, quantum isolators, and energy conduits capable of handling the stresses of interstellar travel. Then he sketched the step-by-step process flow on his tablet, weaving a complex web of stages that would demand airtight security and flawless execution. When Sonia raised an eyebrow at the cost, Tony merely smiled. "I'll transfer $5 billion to your account right now," he said, tapping his phone. "Think of it as seed capital. As soon as the production lines are running, the payoff will be astronomical, no pun intended." For Stark, the sum was a rounding error. Wasting no time, Sonia commissioned 6 remote research islands, each dedicated to one phase of the wormhole project: Island Alpha, theoretical modeling; Island Beta, energy core development; Island Gamma, spatial calibration; Island Delta, shielding matrices; Island Epsilon, portal stabilization; Island Zeta, field testing. Strict compartmentalization protocols forbade any single team from accessing more than its assigned module. No shared networks, no crossover visits, and rigorous clearance checks ensured that the project's core secrets stayed buried on each island. With the infrastructure in place, Sonia reached out to her top-tier clients: defense contractors, space exploration firms, and sovereign nations she'd worked with before. In a series of confidential briefings, she announced that Tony Stark had achieved a prototype capable of stable space-time jumps. She backed her claim with performance data: sub-light-year precision within 0.0001 light-years, energy consumption well below market expectations, and a portal stability window exceeding 36 hours. Every metric met, or outperformed, the industry's most aggressive benchmarks. By the time the briefings concluded, orders were streaming in faster than Sonia could process them. Secured through encrypted channels, the requests left no doubt. Everyone wanted access to this breakthrough, and they were prepared to pay whatever it took. As Sonia closed her laptop, she knew one thing for certain: the wormhole jump project had moved from theoretical marvel to unstoppable juggernaut, capable of reshaping travel, commerce, and the very fabric of reality. In most business dealings, you have to spend months or even years building relationships, navigating bureaus, and jumping through red tape. But when you work with Void Island, you skip all that. Orders are placed in minutes, and delivery happens almost instantly. That's why Tony Stark's wormhole jump technology has become so popular so quickly. On the open market, comparable systems sell for 30 to 40 million credits. Tony offers essentially the same capability for just 20 to 30 million. That price gap exists because traditional arms dealers shoulder massive overhead: hundreds of R&D scientists, sprawling management teams, endless operating costs, and their products remain rare enough to stay expensive. Tony, by contrast, bankrolls his work himself, without a corporate structure to fund or slow him down. His only partner is Damien, with whom he splits every order 50-50. The moment the money hits their account, they're already investing it into the next design, so cash flow never stops. And this is only the first-generation model. Tony estimates that in a year or two he'll finish his Saint advanced wormhole jump unit yet, one that will outperform anything currently available. When that happens, they'll be able to set prices even higher, knowing the market won't have a choice. Early September 2013, Damien knew Blue Star was headed for trouble again, and that he couldn't afford any delays in his own research. For more than a month, he personally oversaw the fabrication of 3 prototype designs. Each ran through rigorous testing, and when he finally saw that all 3 met his specifications, he felt confident enough to hand the project over to La Latina. She'd manage final tweaks in production while he was away. Before departing, Damien gathered everything he'd acquired from his off-world circuits: alien devices, exotic raw materials, annotated star charts, and a stack of technical manuals. He'd also stashed away the experimental thruster modules he'd been developing. Even if Blue Star's industrial infrastructure was lacking, he could still push theoretical boundaries back home. Because Damien himself had engineered his wormhole jump system, his return trip would be far faster than any commercial service could manage. In fact, he only needed 27 small consumables to power the jump sequence, and in a single seamless operation, he was back above Blue Star's atmosphere. He knew that civilian wormhole technology on the open market paled beside the military-grade systems hidden in the arsenals of major spacefaring powers. But for now, Damien was content. He'd made it home swiftly, and with all of his research materials intact, he could finally turn his full attention to the next phase of the project. Damien finished filling Sonia in and headed straight back to the Blue Star to catch the show. When Tony arrived, the first thing he did was sweep Pepper into his arms, their laughter and relief tangling them together until they collapsed onto a nearby couch. After a few calming breaths, Tony looked down at her, concern in his eyes. "Pepper, tell me everything," he said. She hesitated, then began. "Have you ever heard of Aldrich Killian?" Tony's brow furrowed as he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The name sounds familiar. Who is he to you?" Pepper drew a steadying breath. "He's the director of the Superintelligence Agency. He approached me recently, saying he wanted to discuss a potential collaboration." Tony's fingers stilled. "What kind of collaboration?" "He's a biotech researcher," she explained, "and he's already injected himself with an experimental compound, something he calls the extremis virus. His physical strength skyrocketed, way beyond normal limits. So I did some digging." She paused, meeting his gaze. Extremis stands for regeneration. It can reattach severed limbs, enhance musculature, even allow the user to withstand and generate extreme heat or fire. Tony exhaled slowly, processing. Pepper snuggled closer, her voice softer now. "I didn't tell you about everything. Killian also tried to flatter me, to get me on his side, but I didn't want to worry you." She searched his face. "I thought it best not to mention it." Tony's jaw clenched at the hidden detail, but he forced a reassuring smile. "Thank you for telling me this. We'll figure it out together." He wrapped his arms around her, shielding her from the unknown dangers ahead and from Aldrich Killian's ambitions. "Extremis," Tony muttered, scrolling through the data on his wrist display. "On paper, it sounds revolutionary, but the name itself doesn't inspire confidence." Pepper folded her arms. "Any known side effects?" Tony leaned back, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "You're looking at a high failure rate per injection. Even if it takes, you need regular boosters to keep it active. Over time, it destabilizes the body. It's basically a slow-acting poison." Pepper nodded grimly. "And Killian, where is he now? Did you neutralize him?" Tony's expression darkened as he reviewed her dossier. "He was behind a wave of terrorist attacks worldwide. I shut him down, eliminated his cell, rescued the captives. A whole 9 yards. Pepper allowed herself a small, private smile. In truth, she'd struck the final blow herself. Killian had lured her in, demanding she take Extremis against her will. He'd confessed his twisted admiration for her, and his dream of breaking human limitations. But since he was already dead, there was no point in telling Tony every detail. He'd only lose his temper. It's such a shame. He had incredible talent, but he chose the wrong path. Tony Stark's voice was edged with regret as he digested the news. Aldrich Killian had used the Extremis virus to carry out terrorist attacks. He didn't know all the details yet, but that much was unforgivable. Even if Pepper Potts hadn't personally dealt with Killian, once Steve Rogers learned the truth, there'd be no escaping justice. "He really was brilliant," Tony admitted. "It's just too bad he went off the rails." Pepper folded her arms. "For some reason, he also seemed to hate you." Tony raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Killian hated me?" Pepper gave him an exasperated look. "I was part of the reason he lashed out at everyone. He blamed me for cutting him out." Tony frowned. "Why? Did you cross him somehow?" Pepper shook her head. "I honestly don't know, and he never explained. But every time I dealt with him, I got the sense he was desperate to prove himself. He even tried to poach you, offered me a handsomely larger bonus than you ever did, hoping to hire me away from Stark Industries." Tony leaned back, crossing his arms. "So it was all about rivalry. He wanted to show he was better than me." Pepper rolled her eyes, frustration flickering across her face. "Exactly." but it's only now that I hear the name Killian on your lips." Damien's voice was low, edged with frustration. "After everything you've told me, you should have said something sooner." Pepper met his gaze and offered a small, apologetic smile. Damien rolled his eyes, still puzzled, but when he realized Killian had tried to snatch someone right out from under him, a hard glint flashed in his eyes. "Never mind," he said coolly. "He's already dead." Seeing anger stir in Damien, Pepper reached out and traced her fingertips lightly across his chest. "I know," she whispered. "The 4th update has been sent. Chapter 264. I'm afraid of hurting you." Tony Stark lingered a few extra days with Pepper before heading out to the Avengers' private island. He wanted to check on both Bruce Banner and Steve Rogers, 2 old friends who had been through so much already. As he stepped off the small transport, Tony spotted a striking woman standing beside the dock. Her short, wavy hair framed a face both youthful and composed. She wore a tailored jacket and held herself with an easy confidence that made Tony pause in surprise. "Miss Peggy Carter?" he asked, removing his helmet and straightening up. Peggy had technically been of his father's generation, but here she was, alive and looking no older than 30, if that. "It's me," Peggy replied with a warm smile, extending her hand. "Hello, Tony Stark. Welcome back." Tony chuckled as he took her hand. "I have to admit, I never expected you to look this good after, well, everything." Peggy waved off his compliment with a playful laugh. "Steve would kill me if he knew you were flirting." She glanced out toward the water. "Captain Rogers is out for his morning swim. He won't be back for at least another half hour." "That's fine," Tony said, tucking his helmet under one arm. "We'll catch up after he's done." "Speaking of which, where's Bruce?" "Bruce is in the lab," Peggy answered. "He's running some diagnostic tests on the new gamma stabilizer." She gestured down a tree-lined path leading toward the research compound. "Come on, I'll show you." Tony followed Peggy up the walkway, the early sunlight glinting off the island's palm-fringed shoreline. Despite everything they'd all endured, there was still something magical about returning here, to the place they'd built together. "Is Banner holding up okay?" Tony asked as they walked. Peggy gave him a sympathetic look. "He's restless as usual, but he's eager to see what you've done with the suit. He's been tinkering on it non-stop." Tony grinned, clapping Peggy lightly on the shoulder. "You know me. I can't leave well enough alone." They reached the lab entrance, a sleek glass and steel structure set back among the trees. Inside, a faint hum of machinery and the soft, mechanical whirring of diagnostic equipment greeted them. In a corner, Bruce Banner peered into a microscope, his lab coat dusted with flecks of glowing green. "Tony," Bruce called, straightening at the door. "You're back." "Good to see you, Bruce," Tony said, stepping forward. "How's the gamma stabilizer holding up?" Bruce gestured to the console beside him. "Readings are stable. You should be able to test it in the field soon. But I'd like to run a few more simulations first." "Fair enough," Tony replied, scanning the data across the screen. "After that, we get the team back together." He paused, looking around the lab. "And maybe a swim trip for Steve." Peggy appeared at the doorway, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "He'll be thrilled to see you," she said. Tony accepted a cup, inhaling the rich aroma. "Thanks, Peggy." She smiled, her eyes softening for a moment. "Just be careful, Tony." His lips curved into a reassuring half-smile. "I always am." As Bruce dove back into his work and Peggy slipped out to fetch Steve, Tony took a quiet moment to himself. Standing amid the hum of technology and the promise of old friendships renewed, he felt, against all odds, that everything might just work out in the end. Peggy pointed toward a distant cliff. "That's where Banner should be training right now." "Got it. Thanks, Peggy. We'll catch up later." Tony gave her a quick nod and headed off in the direction she'd indicated. A few minutes later, he reached a thundering waterfall and froze. Beneath the torrent stood Banner, transformed into the Hulk, letting the full force of the water crash over him. Above, the cascade had chipped away jagged gravel, hurling razor-sharp stones down into the pool. With astonishing precision, the Hulk snatched each rock out of midair in huge, steady hands, careful not to crush them. His control was flawless. "Steve, all done with your training?" Hulk called, not bothering to look around. The giant sensed Tony's arrival and added casually, "Looks like I'm not the only one putting in overtime." But the voice that answered wasn't Steve's familiar drawl. It was someone else entirely. Tony? Hulk's massive head whipped around, disbelief clear in his eyes. You? I didn't think you'd show up. Tony winked as he stepped out of the spray. Miss me, big guy? Tony glanced up from the console, a teasing smile playing on his lips. So, you went off exploring the universe. Why the sudden trip home? With a soft shimmer of emerald light, Damien's hulking green form melted away, leaving behind the lean, dark-haired young man everyone knew. He ran a hand through his hair. No matter where I roam, Blue Star is still home. I had to come back and check in. Tony leaned forward, arching an eyebrow. Besides, you're the one who talked Steve and me into joining the Void. Somebody's got to see how we're surviving under your expert guidance. Damien winced and rubbed the back of his neck, sheepish. Right, you're not about to tell me I gave you a bad idea, are you? Speak for yourself, Tony replied with a grin. Then, on impulse, he reached out and pinched Damien's waist. Missed me? Ow! What the, Tony? Cut it out! Damien yelped, doubling over and clutching his side. Tony laughed, watching Damien straighten up and shoot him a mock glare. Just making sure you're still the same old big lug I remember. Looking at you now, Damien, it's clear you've got the Hulk completely under control. Tony glanced over with a broad smile. How about we head back to the villa for a drink? You're free to have as much as you like these days, right? Damien blinked, still looking a little uncertain, though his eyes showed no hint of turning green. Tony chuckled softly. I actually figured out how to keep my mind intact half a year ago. I just haven't dared to go out and show off until I felt absolutely confident in managing his strength. Damien fell into step beside him. Before he'd truly embraced the Hulk's power, he'd only heard rumors, how one blow could split mountains, shatter boulders to gravel, even send rock fragments flying like cannon fire. Experiencing that force firsthand was a revelation, sheer, overwhelming strength unmatched by anything else. His earlier loss to Tony hadn't been about raw power at all, but about fighting skill. So what's the Hulk been up to lately? Damien asked, curiosity edging his voice. Has he vanished? Tony Stark glanced at Bruce Banner, still curious about the Hulk's status despite their recent training session. Banner shook his head. No, he said. Hulk's fused with me now. We can communicate directly, but most of the time he's asleep. He only takes over when I lose control, when I get genuinely furious. So when do we spar again? Tony asked with a challenging grin. Banner studied him for a moment, then returned the smile. Anytime you want. I'm not worried you'll hurt me. Tony's eyes sparkled. Oh, pretty bold statement. Then what are you waiting for? Banner replied, stepping into a loose fighting stance. Right now, I guess. In an instant, Tony lunged forward. He feinted low, then launched a surprise kick, only to have it caught midair by Banner's open palm. The impact rang out like thunder. Bang! A blast of wind radiated from their locked positions, rustling the nearby trees so fiercely that leaves showered down around them. Both men stood their ground, breathing heavily, the challenge more thrilling than any controlled test. The forest held its breath, waiting for the next move. When Damien looked down and saw his right hand shifting into a massive green limb, hair sprouting along the knuckles and thick fingers ending in blunt nails, he felt no disappointment. Instead, his eyes gleamed with anticipation. He'd known from the moment he first tapped into the Hulk's power just how terrifyingly strong that side of him could be. If he could merge that power with the Void, there was no telling how far he could push his strength. Before Bruce Banner could react, he lunged for Damien's ankle. But in the same instant, Damien drew his foot back and launched himself 10 meters away in a single fluid motion. Damien studied Banner's current form with interest. Not bad, he said. Looks like you've been training hard since last time. Banner's surprise at Damien's speed flickered across his face, then melted into a calm, confident smile. To live freely, he replied, voice steady, you have to endure a few hardships. In that moment, it was clear both men had changed. Damien no longer feared his own transformation, and Banner had shed much of the doubt that once held him back. Chapter 265, The Power of Vibranium Armor. All right, let's see how well you've mastered your strength after all that training, Tony Stark said, cracking his knuckles. He stood at the edge of the training field, clad in his new vibranium-reinforced suit, its metallic sheen catching the afternoon sun. Bruce Banner met his gaze without flinching. "Don't go easy on me," he replied, his voice calm but charged with challenge. "I'm not as fragile as you'd like to believe." Tony smiled, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Good. I've been itching to test this armor under real stress." Banner felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. It had been over a year since he'd arrived on Tony's private island to join the Void Initiative. On the one hand, life there was nearly perfect. Endless provisions, top-tier labs, and no risk of accidentally leveling a city if he slipped up. On the other, he'd pushed himself relentlessly to regain control over his transformations. No detail was too small. Now he could decide precisely which limb shifted into gamma-charged form, or hold back entirely if he wished. Yet no amount of precision could tame the raw, explosive power coiled inside him. As he stretched out his hands, feeling the energy pulse beneath his skin, Banner knew today would be the real test of his progress, and of Tony's vibranium armor. Although Damien's strength had grown remarkably and his combat skills were top-notch, he still couldn't match Banner's raw power. No matter how much Damien improved, it was unrealistic for him to withstand the Hulk's might. Now that Tony Stark was back, Banner finally had an opponent against whom he could unleash everything. At Tony's return, Banner's skin rippled through shifting shades of green and gray. In mere seconds, his muscles ballooned until he towered 3.5 meters tall. With a thunderous boom, his massive foot shattered the ground and sent boulders flying. Like a savage beast long caged, the Hulk exuded an aura so fierce that Tony's easy grin snapped into a hardened glare. Standing 10 meters apart, Banner flashed a feral smile, and then vanished. In a heartbeat, he was directly above Tony, his right fist arcing down toward Stark's helmet while his left arm pinned him in place. Stark braced himself, leaning forward without a hint of uncertainty. But Banner wasn't finished. He slammed his massive fist into the earth with a deafening crack. The ground tore open in a 5-meter-wide crater, and shockwaves rippled outward, shaking every nearby structure and rattling Damien's teeth as he watched from the sidelines. A fierce gust of wind blasted from both earth and sky, hurling loose gravel like deadly cannonballs straight at Tony. Squinting against the onslaught, he slammed his boot into the ground and shot upward. The rocks and debris tore past his previous position, ripping into the forest behind him. Each impact rang out as shattered trunks cracked and splintered. A massive oak groaned, collapsed in a thunderous crash, and sent a plume of dust swirling into the air. Bruce Banner, now fully transformed into the Hulk, stood like a living battering ram, every muscle rippling with raw, lethal power. A wild, triumphant grin twisted his features as he cocked his head. "Not an easy opponent, are you?" Tony met that manic gleam with cool determination. Sensing Banner's growing confidence and the danger it posed, he tapped his wrist. "Jarvis, begin reloading the vibranium armor." His command crackled through the suit's internal network, and Tony braced himself for whatever the Hulk would throw next. Originally, Stark had designed his new vibranium armor with Kyle in mind, as a hypothetical opponent. Kyle's raw strength and virtually impenetrable defense left no obvious weaknesses, making evasive tactics alone useless. But Stark's priorities lay elsewhere, and he never got to deploy it. Now facing Bruce Banner, he decided to put it to the test. "Engage," Tony ordered. "Affirmative," Jarvis replied. Beneath the sprawling grounds of Stark Manor, the hatch of the concealed space cruiser slid open. In an instant, the sleek vibranium suit rocketed into the hangar, hovering before Tony. "I'm not expecting this to be easy," Tony said, voice modulated through the armor's speakers. "But let's give it our best." Bruce Banner cracked a wry smile. "By all means, I'm looking forward to this." Tony returned the grin, channels of void energy surging into his gauntlets. He knew Banner started at a higher baseline of power. Sooner or later, Bruce would grow so formidable that few could stand against him. But that day hadn't come yet. Today, Tony wasn't about to back down. Void energy crackled in Damien's fists as he surged forward without a second thought. In an instant, he was upon Banner, swinging a heavy punch. Banner met him head-on, their blows colliding with a thunderous boom. A shockwave rippled outward, shaking the ground beneath them. Banner staggered back only half a meter, bracing himself, but Damien was driven back more than 10 meters, so violently that the earth split open in a jagged ravine at his feet. Damien's knuckles screamed in protest, bone and sinew aching from the impact, but he refused to yield. He drew on the life force coursing through his veins, and the agony receded as quickly as it had flared. At the same time, the void energy he'd unleashed congealed into a viscous tar-like substance that clung to Banner's right fist. Then, pang! It detonated against the green giant's hand. Banner wavered under the sudden blast, his massive frame shuddering. A deep crack appeared across his palm, and dark, emerald-tinted blood seeped out in thick droplets, splattering onto the rocky ground below. Damien steadied himself, readying for the next strike. Damien watched Tony's latest void-charged blast slam into the reinforced wall behind him, cracks spidering outwards in a silent roar. He dusted off his shoulder, his expression amused. "Your mastery of the void has improved," he conceded as the dust settled, "but not enough to hurt me." Tony Stark's arc reactor glowed through his armored chestplate as he studied Damien with narrowing eyes. He raised a gauntleted hand to inspect the scorched fingers. But before he could open it, the wound sealed itself with uncanny speed, flesh knitting, blood stanching, as if time itself were rushing to repair the damage. Tony's voice was flat, but there was steel underneath. "I noticed. You're fast. You hit like hell, but your strength wasn't the real question. Your resilience was." He tapped at a wrist interface. "Your healing factor's been upgraded 37 times. I crunched the numbers. You shrug off ordinary injuries in seconds." Damien cracked a half smile and flexed his hand, now skin perfect and unmarked. "That's right. I've got super endurance, super strength, and a defense matrix that can regenerate on the fly. So suit up, Tony. Don't hold anything back, because even if you landed every punch, you still wouldn't put a dent in me." Tony's HUD flickered as he powered up his gauntlets. "We'll see about that." He launched himself forward, repulsors flaring. Damien braced himself, feet planted, arms poised to absorb whatever came next. In that instant, the vast hangar, rips in its ceiling, blast marks on its walls, felt smaller, charged with the tension of two titans about to collide. Neither man flinched, neither backed down. And as Tony dove in, Damien prepared to prove that even a void-forged attack was meaningless against a force that refused to break. Damien knew that his greatest assets were endurance and raw strength, so he deliberately steered his evolution toward accelerated recovery and top-end speed. That way, even against lightning-fast foes like Tony and Renoli, he could afford to make mistakes of his own, so long as he survived long enough to exploit theirs. He was under no illusions. True mastery of combat techniques and real battlefield experience would take far longer to develop. By leaning into what he already did best, he could outlast his opponents until he found and forced their openings. Once he shifted into his Blood Bull form, his regenerate prowess became terrifying. A single lapse by the enemy, and he would overwhelm them. The rationale behind his evolution path was simple, and it echoed the Hulk's own advice. If you can't land the first strike, at least ensure you can't be knocked out. Protect your vital points, keep moving, and wait for the chance to strike back without ever risking your life. Tony ran a hand over his temples as he absorbed Damien's explanation. He couldn't help but offer grudging approval. "You made the smartest, most efficient evolution choice I've ever seen, without any help too. That's some serious strategic thinking." Damien smirked. Putting Tony on the defensive like this was proof he'd chosen the right path, the simplest, most direct way to sharpen his own skills. "Go ahead," he challenged. "Don your steel armor. Show me how it stands up to a real test." Tony's grin widened. "Fine by me. But here's the deal. Whoever lands the first crushing blow admits defeat. Or maybe I'll spot a flaw in your defenses and make you concede." Damien's pulse quickened at the praise. "I've known all along that a suit of steel won't slow down an opponent as relentless as you. That's exactly why I came prepared." Tony chuckled and flicked his finger. "Oh yeah? And what preparations are those?" Before Damien could answer, a scarlet war axe the size of a lamppost plummeted from the sky. The moment its gleaming edge struck the earth, the ground cracked apart as if it were nothing but tofu. Damien's heart pounded at the sheer force and precision of the blow. Then, with a series of mechanical clicks and magnetic whirs, a brand new suit of armor assembled itself around Tony. Plates snapped into place over his shoulders, chest, arms, and legs, bonding seamlessly to form a shining red and gold exoskeleton. Tony flexed a gauntleted fist and met Damien's gaze. Your move. Tony extended his arms, and a pair of crimson gauntlets floated down to clasp over his forearms. In one fluid motion, he hoisted a massive scarlet battle axe with a single hand. Banner's eyes widened as red light flared behind Tony's mask, and tendrils of void energy churned around him, lending the axe an otherworldly glow. Though Tony still stood slightly shorter than Banner, his upgraded armor now stood over 8 feet tall, erasing much of the height difference between them. This is the new vibranium armor, Tony announced, voice cold with anticipation. It's built for frontal assault and raw power. Let's see if you can handle it. With that, he activated void mode. His eyes sharpened to pinpoints of light, and in an instant he rocketed skyward. Banner braced himself as Tony came down in a devastating arc, an attack that felt as if it could split mountains. Banner had no full reckoning of the suit's capabilities, but his reinforced defenses and rapid healing kept him from tipping backward. He slammed both hands against the blade just before it struck, jolting shockwaves through his arms. The axe's edge bit into his gauntlets with a shriek of metal on metal, and Banner was forced to leap back, narrowly avoiding the full brunt of the blow. When Damien stumbled back from the massive axe blow, the force of the wind whipped across his skin. The weapon struck the earth with a thunderous crack, ripping the ground open in a fissure more than 30 feet across. Through the cloud of dust, a figure in battle armor, its plates glowing with purple energy, rose slowly from the chasm. Damien realized with a flicker of surprise that he hadn't absorbed the strike. He'd retreated. Tony, hovering above the scarred earth, watched him for a heartbeat, then dispensed with the crimson axe. It spun through the air and thudded blade first into the soil. They were testing one another, not trying to kill. The axe was simply too hazardous for this match. Without warning, Tony's vibranium gauntlets burst into violet flame. He lunged, closing the distance in an instant, and unleashed a bone-shaking punch at Damien's helmeted head. Damien raised his arms just in time, his forearms jolting with the impact as his boots sank into the fractured ground. Tony's attack hit like a supersonic jet made of forged steel, his speed and power amplified by the suit. Damien felt the tremor of his own bones, grit his teeth against the shock, and pushed off the earth. With a roar, he drove a savage kick into Tony's midsection, countering that violet-flamed fist with everything he had. Tony had anticipated the attack. He drove his boots into Banner's thighs and catapulted himself skyward, spinning dozens of times like a razor-sharp top. At the apex of his ascent, his leg became a gleaming blade, slicing viciously at Banner's arm. The impact was devastating. Banner's body rocketed backward for hundreds of meters, flattening giant pines in his wake before crashing into the mountain and gouging a deep crater into the stone face. But Tony wasn't finished. With a thunderous roar, he unleashed the full blast of void energy from his suit. The explosion rent a massive hole in the mountainside, and the shockwave rolled across the sky like distant thunder, even catching the attention of Steve and Peggy, who were swimming offshore. The two dove from the water and sprinted toward the chaos. Floating down from above, Tony came to rest beside Banner. The Hulk lay sprawled on the jagged rocks, one arm twisted unnaturally, his chest heaving as he fought for breath. Through the speakers in his mask, Tony's voice remained cool and unruffled. "Banner," he said, "you always were a tough opponent." Tony stood over Damien, voice cold with certainty. "Even if you possess superpowers, and even if you're a Void God cult initiate, there aren't many who can match me. I hate admitting it, but I can't deny the fact that you're strong." He paused, pacing around Damien's crumpled form. "That's exactly why I seek out fighters like you. I refuse to ever find myself outclassed by some genetic deficiency. Sure, chasing these battles has fried more than a few of my brain cells, but I'll take that price rather than be forced to cower." Damien, his right arm twisted grotesquely with bone exposed, could only watch Tony with a grimace of pain. Tony's confidence was unmistakable. As one of the Void Cult's premier experts, he'd already charted his future power curve. Locked away in his lab were untapped reserves of Uru metal, an alien alloy of staggeringly high strength. If he ever forged a suit of battle armor from it, his might would become terrifyingly absolute. Who could say where the balance of power would lie then? Tony looked down and declared, "You're no match for me." Through clenched teeth, Damien pressed his left hand against the shattered remains of his right arm, sweat beading at his brow. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony tearing through him, but he forced out a whisper. "Thank you for your mercy. I understand." Damien had been confident that he could harness the Hulk's strength and bolster his resilience enough to take on Tony. At first, his gamble paid off. Facing Tony in his old iron armor didn't intimidate him in the slightest. What caught Damien off guard, however, was Tony's sudden switch to a brand new suit mid-fight. Before he knew what hit him, Tony landed a single, devastating kick that tore Damien's arm from its socket. It was only Tony's mercy that saved him from an even harsher blow to the skull. Otherwise, Damien would have been unconscious, if not worse. In that instant, Damien understood just how naive he'd been. The heat of a real battlefield was nothing like the controlled sparring matches he'd envisioned. He also realized he had to keep pushing himself. Every day he'd generate tens of thousands of units, and already the first wave had swelled to 4,000. Chapter 266, The Equilibrium Point. The thunder of collapsing trees drew Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter through the undergrowth. They emerged into a clearing gone to chaos. Great gouges rent the earth, shattered trunks lay strewn in every direction, and a lone, armored figure stood amid the wreckage, while Bruce Banner slumped against a fallen log, blood trickling from a split brow. Steve's eyes narrowed at the sight of that gleaming red and gold suit. It wasn't the exact design he'd seen before, but the fierce orange glow around the helmet and the telltale purple pulse of the arc reactor left no doubt. "So you two decided to settle this with a brawl, and forgot to send out the memo?" Tony Stark shrugged as the armor's whirring servos powered down. Plates slid back into place until he stood in his familiar, battered t-shirt, no longer a walking fortress, just a man who'd clearly just been in one heck of a fight. "It was spontaneous," he admitted. "You were out for a swim. I didn't have time to warn you." Peggy crouched beside Banner, brushing his hair back from the stitches along his scalp. "And the victor?" Tony glanced between them, then back to Banner. "He tapped out pretty fast." Banner rubbed at the stitch line and offered a tired half-smile. "I'd say I got more than a slap in the face. You were a one-man wrecking crew." Tony slid his hands into his pockets, his expression returning to casual banter. "All part of the service." Steve helped Banner to his feet and gave Tony a pointed look. "Next time, at least warn us before you flatten a forest." With the fight done and credentials clear, the three heroes exchanged wry grins in the wreckage, battle-scarred but unbroken, each more determined than ever to find the balance between power and control. Damien's punch slammed into Tony's armored forearm with a horrifying crack. Tony staggered back, clutching the dented plating as hydraulic fluid leaked from a shattered seam. "If I don't give this everything I've got, I'll never beat you," Damien said, lowering his guard only slightly. "And now that your self-repair's been upgraded, I'll have to hit even harder. You said I could keep pace. So, are you all right?" Tony held up his hands in a helpless shrug, wincing as he inspected the damage. "Believe me, I don't enjoy this any more than you do. But in Hulk form, an injury like this will heal itself in about 5 minutes. It's going to hurt like hell, sure, but the bones will reset." Bruce Banner, leaning against a ruined support beam, stepped forward and examined Tony's bent plating. 5 minutes to knit broken bones?" he said, eyebrows rising. "Your physiology is absolutely off the charts." Tony let out a rueful laugh. "I know, right? In normal circumstances, a fracture sidelines you for weeks, maybe months of rehab, retraining, the whole works. But since we got that gift from the void, my body bounces back in minutes." Damien gave a tight nod. The void's power had changed them all, and this fight was far from over. He raised his fists again, determination burning in his eyes. Whatever lay ahead, he would be ready. If Damien keeps evolving like this, he might be injured one moment and fully healed the next. Steve had just returned when he found Tony and Damien facing off in the courtyard. "What sparked this fight?" he asked, eyeing the two. Tony shrugged, casually dusting off one of his gauntlets. "Damien's gotten a lot stronger lately. He actually thinks he can beat me, so I let him have a little spar." Steve looked to Damien for confirmation. Tony grinned and continued. "Honestly, in my old steel suit, I'd have won hands down. But who would have guessed Damien would show up in a full vibranium rig?" Damien massaged his shoulder, wincing. He'd been relying on his trademark Bull Bastion style, pure, unrelenting force, to handle tech-based fighters like Tony. The idea was simple. No matter how fast or advanced the enemy, a single bone-crushing blow would settle the score. Unfortunately, Tony's vibranium plating shifted the balance. One strike landed so hard that Damien's arm was left crippled. Staring at the bent metal around his bicep, Damien realized the truth. If future opponents come armed with technology like Tony's, brute strength alone won't be enough. He'll have to steer his evolution in new directions, adapting his powers to the threat at hand. You've chosen the right path, but you haven't evolved nearly enough. There are still countless gaps in your abilities, and you only have the barest idea of how to fill them. I won't just sit back and let you outpace me, though if you ever do, I promise I'll congratulate you. Tony sprang to his feet and gave Damien a firm pat on the shoulder. His tone grew serious. Steve hasn't gone one-on-one with you yet. Steve, you saw Damien's last breakthrough. How strong has he become? Steve's eyes widened. He'd watched Damien evolve firsthand and had taught him every combat technique he knew. He was acutely aware of Damien's terrifying power Steve himself could never match in a fair fight. And yet, if Damien had just lost to Tony again, how far had Tony really come? Steve met Tony's gaze. So, how many evolutions have you unlocked? Tony grinned, chest puffed out. 297, and I'm closing in on 300. Steve nodded slowly. At that level, you can literally project yourself into the cosmos. You'd rank among the very top of the Void God sect. You're not easy to beat, Damien said with a wry smile. Tony grinned in response. Tell me, how many top-tier powerhouses does the Void Divine Religion have? Steve Rogers leaned forward, curiosity lighting his eyes. There are 7 in all. You've already met 4 of them, Renoli and her cadre. Then, of course, there are the 2 official spokespeople, Sonia and Yamalix. Sonia and Yamalix, Tony echoed. What do we know about them? What kind of abilities do they possess? Steve shrugged. I can't give you specifics, but I do know they're every bit as strong as I am. And if training goes as planned, Damien here should soon rank alongside the Void Divine's elite. Tony quirked an eyebrow, ready to debate the point, until Damien cut him off. Save the pep talk, Tony. I used to think I was pretty powerful, but after going up against you, I've realized I'm nowhere near the top yet. Damien paused, uncertain whether to laugh or sigh. I'm not kidding, he added. Renaud and the others all remarked on your high potential, Banner said, leaning forward. Honestly, even though you've only evolved a few times, your strength already ranks among the elite. A typical powerhouse couldn't touch you, or even dent your defenses. Yes, you just lost to me, but don't be so hard on yourself. You're far stronger than you realize. Damien absorbed the praise with a serious nod. Thank you. Banner smiled in relief. He'd been a little down on himself after that quick victory. So, he asked, when do you think you'll actually break into the top tier? Steve spoke up, concern lining his voice. Without any external enhancements, just your own genetic modifications, you'll need dozens more evolutions beyond where I am now to reach the very top. And even then, you'll have to back that raw power up with exceptional combat experience and technique. Damien glanced at Steve and noticed how his breathing had slowed, how his posture looked even more imposing than before. Then he returned his gaze to Banner and Steve, determination flickering in his eyes. All right, he said. Then it's settled. I've got my next goal. Although Lacey joined the Void cult after Damien, she's already undergone more than 40 times as many evolutions as he has. In fact, only Alex outranks her in total evolutions. Lacey now holds the second highest count in the entire organization. Under the combined guidance of Renoli, Kyle, and the Predictor, she trains and spars daily, following a clear, well-defined path of growth. Her meteoric rise is the product of relentless effort, propelling her from relative obscurity into the top tier of the Void God's faithful. Damien knows that, since they began, at the same starting point, the only way he can catch up is to reach Lacey's level of power. That stunning beauty really is one of the top ranks? Hearing Tony's words, Damien couldn't help but think back to the dazzling warrior who'd stolen the spotlight during the New York battle. Don't underestimate someone just because she's female, Steve warned. Lacey is one of the very few level 3 bounty hunters in the universe. You haven't even set foot out there yet, so you have no idea what it takes to reach that rank. But trust me, she isn't just at the top of the Void Cult. She's among the fiercest combatants anywhere in the cosmos. In a world of powerful fighters, gender doesn't determine strength. If you ever let that kind of prejudice cost you dearly, don't say I didn't warn you. Damien listened, recognizing Steve's stubborn streak, but feeling compelled to respond. Thanks to Pepper, he'd long known that women could be every bit as capable. Despite his own occasional bravado, he held no real bias. After all, he'd seen the Ancient One, the Sorcerer Supreme, and Captain Marvel, women whose power ranks among the universe's elite. Understood, Damien said. Steve nodded in approval. Tony gave Steve a sidelong glance. He knew Steve didn't actually believe a word of it. Old-school machismo dies hard, and Steve would need to see a female powerhouse in action before he'd admit it. Fine, Tony said with a smirk. I'll have Jarvis schedule the repairs. Meanwhile, let's grab a drink. They drifted away, leaving Bruce Banner behind. Within seconds, Bruce's shattered bones knit themselves back together, his regeneration doing its work. As soon as he'd shifted back into his human form, Bruce made his way over to Damien, fresh off a year-long mission in deep space. You've been off in the universe for over a year, Bruce said, clapping Damien on the shoulder. What exactly were you working on? Damien stretched and shrugged. Mostly wormhole jump technology, and I've been fabricating one of the power cores for our new Aegis-class starship. Tony raised an eyebrow. Wormhole jumps? That's huge. How's the research going? Damien grinned and took a steadying breath. Pretty well. We've managed to open stable micro-wormholes for short-range transport. Next step is scaling it up for long-distance jumps. Bruce's eyes lit up. If we nail that, we could revolutionize interstellar travel. Tony nodded, already picturing the possibilities. Then here's to the next big leap. Cheers, guys. Of course it was a success, Damien declared, leaning back in his chair with a self-satisfied smile. I've already mastered the gravity generator, the wormhole jumping drive, and the core energy systems. Now all that remains is to design a truly advanced thruster. Then I'll have my very own space battleship. He turned to Tony Stark. When I get to that stage, I'll need an AI brain sophisticated enough to handle starship navigation and tactical decision-making. Tony, I'd like you on the project. Let's see what we can build together. Tony grinned. Lead humanity to the stars? Sounds like my kind of party. AI isn't exactly my day job, but if you want me, I'm in. Just give me a blueprint and some lab time. Consider it done. Bruce Banner nodded enthusiastically. Don't worry, Tony. Even if AI's not your forte, your creativity will be invaluable. And there's no rush. We've got all the time we need to get this right. Tony leaned back, clearly pleased by the vote of confidence. The rest of the team gathered their things and followed Damien out to his nearby villa, where they could continue the discussion in more comfort. As they headed off, Paige hung back. She knew the others would want to dive straight into technical details, and she wasn't ready to intrude on that. Once she was certain they were out of earshot, she slipped away down the garden path. Moments later, Steve Rogers strolled up beside her, holding a glass of wine. He offered it with a knowing smile. You're not out here just to enjoy the scenery, are you? Paige laughed softly, accepted the glass. You know me too well, Captain. I had my reasons for some fresh air. Steve's grin widened. Fair enough. Want to tell me what's on your mind? Paige sipped her wine and looked out at the moonlit grounds. In a minute. First, I want to see how they plan to make the stars feel a lot closer. There are beauties scattered across the galaxy. Next time, I'll show you some of their customs and other delights, Tony teased, catching Steve's curious look. He glanced around the room, no sign of Peggy Carter nearby, then leaned in to whisper. The other occupants were all men, and Tony knew exactly what was on their minds. As the old saying goes, give a man money, and he'll sooner or later let loose. Married or not, if the chance for a little fun comes up, most guys won't pass it by. Better that than spending every evening just crunching numbers. Interplanetary dating? Steve muttered, raising an eyebrow. Do you really think alien biology could match our standards of beauty? Bruce Banner cracked a small smile at the question, but the memory of the Chitauri's insectoid faces made him shudder. Hard to imagine. I'd rather not find out firsthand. Tony laughed softly. Exactly. I'm not signing up for a date with a green-skinned warrior, and with Peggy around, it'd be awkward. Steve shifted, a hint of discomfort flickering across his features. In his younger days, he'd been the toast of every ballroom, the subject of countless admirers, and he'd certainly enjoyed the experience. But even he had to admit there were limits to his curiosity. It's true not all threats fit the Chitauri mold, but remember, the universe is full of surprises. You'll see for yourself the next time you come along, Tony added with a grin. And don't worry about Miss Page, he continued, catching both Bruce and Steve's raised eyebrows. There'll always be a chance with her. Bruce, ever restless, brightened at once. When do we leave next? I'm finally confident in my control over the Hulk. I didn't come back just to see Pepper. Steve exchanged a glance with Tony. According to Damien, Blue Star's about to face trouble again soon. We'll set a departure date once we know more. Tony's smile faded as he absorbed the news. Blue Star in crisis again? Steve's expression turned thoughtful. If it's internal, we can handle it. Earth's our home turf. But any alien unrest brings an unpredictable risk. Bruce nodded. Then it sounds like we'd better get ready for anything. What's the mission this time? Bruce Banner asked, his voice calm but alert. He'd spent months mastering the Hulk's strength, and for the first time, he no longer feared the power he wielded. Now he just wanted to know what kind of threat was on the way. Tony Stark shook his head. I don't have all the details yet. Damien hasn't debriefed me. Steve Rogers leaned forward. All I know is Damien wants me to stay on Blue Star, to see if we can head off any disasters before they happen. You'll be on standby, Tony said firmly. The second I get solid intel and need you in action, I'll let you know. Tony's expression darkened as he thought of Odin's missing treasure, the very artifact some believed was about to resurface. Its power was unknown, and he could only hope this enemy wouldn't be as relentless as Loki's Chitauri. If another New York-scale attack happened, even Stark Industries might struggle to limit the damage. Understood, Bruce said. Steve glanced at Tony. If I'm pinned to Blue Star, can I at least patrol the rest of the city? Bruce exchanged a look with Tony. What's your call, Tony? Damien hadn't been intimate with a woman in years, ever since he inherited the Hulk's power. For any adult man, that kind of enforced abstinence is torture. Now that he's finally learned to control the transformation, he can date freely without fearing he'll suddenly turn green. Naturally, he's eager to get out, unwind, and recapture some of the fun he's missed. I'll wire you 100 million later, Damien said to Tony. Go out and enjoy yourself. Tony's hook his head. That's way too much. Damien's grin grew wider, but he held up a hand. Come on, Tony. We're friends. You've been living on my private island for ages. Another 100 million is nothing to me. Tony studied him for a moment, then offered a small smile. It wasn't the money that bothered him. He simply didn't want Damien packing up and heading back to New York. Because financial matters are already tricky, if Banner tried to leverage his powers for money, the fallout would be far worse than any monetary shortfall. Remember, everyone answers to the commandments, and you promised Miss Sonia you'd keep a close watch on Blue Star. If Banner or Steve stir up trouble, you'll be the one in hot water. All right, Tony, thanks, Banner murmured. He'd meant to refuse, but Tony's unwavering gaze left him no room to argue. Reluctantly, he accepted the help. Tony turned to Steve. By the way, did you and Miss Page ever take your honeymoon? We did, Steve replied with a smile. We spent it right here on the island. Peggy said there's something special about this place. No outside hustle, very little drama. He glanced up at Tony. It was perfect. Director Rockwell leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he regarded Damien across the table. You know what everyone says, no matter how practical you are, a woman still craves a bit of romance. Damien gave a measured nod. Understood, sir. Rockwell's lips curled into a knowing smile. When Miss Page gets to relive her youth, she'll want to experience everything she missed the first time around. I'm allotting you 100 million credits. Use them to show her a proper good time. 100 million? Damien's eyebrows shot up. Exactly. Don't haggle over the sum, Rockwell replied. If you vowed to look after Paige, then make sure you treat her right. At a nearby console, Tony Stark watched this exchange with mild amusement. Having only recently returned to Blue Star as S.H.I.E.L.D.'s new tech consultant, he'd already seen how fiercely Damien threw himself into his duties. A paycheck from S.H.I.E.L.D. alone couldn't account for such commitment. This young agent truly believed in their cause. Tony remembered how quietly determined Paige could be. When asked where she wanted to go, she'd simply stayed on the island, content to let others plan every detail. Yet behind her calm exterior lay a spirit eager to seize life. Tony, who lived for adrenaline and surprises, recognized that well. Sometimes what a person really needed was a push outside their comfort zone. Damien's gaze flickered at Rockwell's mention of lost opportunities. After joining the Void Cult, he'd volunteered for every S.H.I.E.L.D. assignment that came his way, ever since the first time he'd escorted Paige on a mission. But he refused to rest on his laurels. Between deployments, he'd trained tirelessly, fine-tuning his combat skills, studying ancient texts, and pushing his body to its limits, so that he'd never again feel powerless in the face of a challenge. As the meeting adjourned, Tony strolled over and clapped Damien on the shoulder. "Well, kid, you've got your orders. 100 million credits and an adventurous spirit. What could possibly go wrong?" Damien allowed himself a wry grin. "You'd be surprised, Mr. Stark, but I don't back down from a challenge." He stepped out of the war room, determination in every stride. With a fortune at his disposal and a chance to rekindle Paige's lost youth, he was ready to craft an adventure they would both remember and prove to himself just how strong he had become. Tony waved his hand dismissively. "Don't mention it." Steve gave him a genuine smile. "Really, I appreciate you doing this." Tony nodded and turned to Steve. "By the way, Banner opted for evolutionary resilience as his upgrade path." Steve raised an eyebrow. "And you?" Jarvis pinged, confirming the transfer of their funds. Tony leaned back. "I've gone through 96 evolutionary cycles. My upgrades have been spread pretty evenly, no glaring weaknesses, but no super specialty either." Steve nodded knowingly. "Right, you're saying being a jack-of-all-trades isn't ideal long-term, but for now, a balanced build works." Tony shrugged. "Exactly. My genetic modifications gave me a higher baseline, but once you factor in your tech, my starting line actually looks a lot lower. There are still plenty of gaps to fill." He paused to let that sink in. "So my plan is simple. Raise my lowest stats across the board, then pick one area to master later." Steve smiled. "Makes sense." He proceeded to outline his own evolution strategy and the direction he intended to pursue next. Damien's resilience had improved dramatically. He still couldn't shrug off every cutting-edge weapon, especially heavy hitters like Banner's Gamma-Tech arms, yet even without his vibranium shield, he could now ignore the punishment of standard rifles. A specialized anti-tank sniper rifle was another story. He wouldn't survive a direct hit from that. Still, his combat instincts and perception had sharpened so much that once he gripped the shield again, he no longer worried about a hidden marksman zeroing in on his unguarded legs. Tony regarded him thoughtfully. "Your fighting technique is already top tier. If we work on your overall balance, physical, mental, tactical, you'll become unstoppable." Steve leaned forward. "Provided you have a clear plan." Tony nodded. "The Void Blessing is your ticket to true evolution. The more you tap into it, the stronger you'll grow. But you can't chase every power at once. You just dilute your progress. Decide what you need and focus on sharpening that edge." Tony had never personally tutored them. He'd only shared general scientific principles and sketched out possible evolutionary paths. Once Bruce and Steve grasped those ideas, they each identified their greatest weaknesses and the new abilities they most wanted to develop. With that settled, the three of them sat down for a casual chat. Bruce admitted, "Once I've got some money saved up, I'm counting on you to show me how it's really done." Tony chuckled and with characteristic frankness gave him a step-by-step rundown of everything he'd need to know. Meanwhile, Steve cleared his throat. "So where do women these days prefer to go on a first date?" As a man plucked from the past, Steve still found modern courtship rituals something of a mystery, even after all his time awake. Tony and Bruce exchanged amused glances and began filling him in on the finer points of 21st century romance. Chapter 267. I was just passing by. A week after his exile on Tony's private island, Tony Stark flew Damien back to New York. Returning after more than a year away, Damien felt a surge of excitement as he stepped onto the bustling city streets. Surrounded by the crowds, he no longer felt the edge of panic that had haunted him before. With Tony's generous gift of $100 million, Damien headed straight for the upscale villa district. He couldn't afford a sprawling manor yet, but he could certainly buy a villa worth tens of millions. As he flipped through listing after listing, he noticed something that made him smile wryly. Every single property was registered to someone named Harvey. It seemed the name Harvey had become New York's hottest real estate brand overnight. Thanks to Tony's connections, Damien now had a completely new identity. No longer Dr. Damien Hall, he was officially Bruce Hulk, a wealthy second-generation heir who'd graduated from college 2 years ago and boasted an impeccable family background. By keeping a low profile and using his new alias, his reappearance in New York sparked almost no interest. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers had gleaned the crucial details he needed from Tony and Damien. He and Peggy packed their bags and set off for Europe. And with that, 7 quiet days slipped by. Damien eased his midnight blue convertible through the city streets, the morning sun glinting off its polished curves. He'd stripped off his suit jacket, sleeves rolled up, enjoying the rare moment of peace before the day's whirlwind of meetings and covert missions began. At the next light, out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement in a shock of yellow. Banner was there, one elbow hooked over the door of a Lamborghini Aventador, the other hand fiddling with his phone, no doubt running through pickup lines. Damien slowed and swung his eyes over to his old friend. Banner's jaw dropped so noticeably that Damien had to suppress a smile. "What, Damien?" Banner managed, blinking as though he weren't certain he'd really seen him. Damien raised an eyebrow. "You look like you've just spotted a ghost." Banner cleared his throat and straightened. "Ha! Hi, Damien." His voice cracked at the first syllable. "Fancy seeing you here." Damien nodded. "Traffic's a nightmare today." He tapped the horn lightly, then leaned back and gestured at Banner's wide-eyed expression. "Listen, you've been doing great with the control drills. You're not going to Hulk out on me at a stoplight." Banner's cheeks flushed. "Thanks to you, I've got it under control now. But I didn't expect to see you." Damien grinned. "Calm down. We're on Earth, not some parallel universe." Banner gave a short, awkward laugh, his tension easing. "Right. Still, it's good to see you." He glanced around. "So, are you out here to—" He cleared his throat again. "Pick up girls?" Damien rolled his eyes and revved the engine. "Don't flatter yourself. I've got better things to do. But if you need pointers, I'm happy to give you a lesson or two." The light turned green. Banner swallowed, flashed a lopsided grin, and waved as he drove off. Damien watched him go, shaking his head, before slipping back into traffic and heading toward whatever adventure lay ahead. Damien sank into the passenger seat and exhaled. "Honestly, I've been under so much pressure for so long. If I weren't depressed already, this new life would overwhelm me. I just want to unwind for a bit. After that, I'll see how best to help Tony. We can study together, train together. It doesn't all have to be work." Bruce Banner leaned back, relief washing over his tense features. "Relaxing sounds perfect," he said. "Once you've joined the Void cult and proven your worth, as long as you don't break the rules, you're free to do whatever you like." Damien gave a small, grateful smile. "That's good to hear. By the way, what brings you out here, Dr. Banner?" Bruce looked mildly startled, hesitated, then shrugged. "Oh, I'm just passing through. No big reason." At the next red light, Damien tapped the accelerator, the engine roaring as he pulled away. Banner watched the car shrink in his rearview mirror, confusion knitting his brow, until a horn blared behind him. Startled, he floored it to merge out of the way. But instead of circling back to find, well, whatever, or whoever he'd been originally searching for, Banner set his course for Stark Manor. He had questions, and Tony Stark deserved answers. Bruce barreled into Stark Manor, nearly skidding to a halt in Tony's workshop. Tony, guess who I just ran into?" Tony Stark, elbow deep in a thruster assembly, looked up with an arched brow. "If it's another S-Shield snag, I'm swamped. Try not to break anything on your way in." No, not S-Shield, Bruce Banner said, practically bouncing in place. "I ran into Damien." Tony froze, wrench in mid-twist. "Damien? You're kidding." Bruce collapsed onto a nearby stool. "I thought you'd been swept up for questioning." My head practically exploded. Tony set the wrench down and chuckled. Relax. I literally saw him strolling across the avenue. First time I've laid eyes on him in person. Bruce let out a shaky breath. I nearly called half the Avengers. Rumors run wild, Tony said, picking up a clean rag. But Damien? He hangs out in the Blue Star District, eats, drinks, flirts, a total party animal. Bruce shook his head, a relieved grin spreading. So no secret meeting, no covert ops? None, Tony confirmed. Just a guy having the time of his life. Bruce stood and stretched. Well, that's a load off. Tony leaned back against his workbench. You know, if you ever want to let loose, you could always join the Void. Bruce cocked an eyebrow. Join the Void? Tony flashed a grin. Exactly. Banner peered at the data streaming across his screen while Tony perched on the edge of the workbench. Without looking up, Banner said, Just remember, when you meet him, stay humble. Tony repeated, Stay humble. Got it. That way I won't get into trouble, and I might even get some help from Damien? Exactly, Banner replied. If you have questions, wait for the right moment and ask. He might not always give you the answer, but when he does, it's clear. No more second-guessing or wasted detours. Tony tapped his fingers against the bench. Sounds like the easy life of someone with power. Just pop in, snag the info you need, and you're good to go. Banner swiveled in his chair. That only works when your meeting is genuine, a chance encounter. If you start hunting him down on purpose, I can't say how he'll react. Tony leaned back, considering. Fair point. I've asked Damien for help before, but only because we stumbled into each other. That made our relationship feel more like friendship than business. I can't guarantee the same openness if I force it. Banner nodded. Exactly. Let things happen naturally. You'll know when the time is right. Damien gave Banner a stern look. Listen, if you veer off the plan, you'll get into serious trouble, and when you come begging me for help, you'll only make everything worse. Banner held up a hand. I get it. Satisfied that Banner understood, Damien continued. Good. I'm going back to crunch the thruster data. You take some time to rest, then join me. We need to tackle this together. Our Blue Star project hinges on getting these engines right. It's the only thing standing between us and the interstellar era. Tony, who'd been watching from the control room doorway, spoke up. Understood. Give me 1 more month. I'll have my analysis ready and report back on schedule. Banner gave Tony a curt nod, then climbed into his Lamborghini and drove off. 10,000 credits a day. It was a steep price, and this was only the first progress report. Chapter 268, Thor Requests Aid. Over a month had passed in quiet study at Stark Manor. Day after day, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner pored over schematics and data, determined to reverse engineer interstellar thrusters. Even with Tony's vast resources, they knew that true mastery meant not only building these engines from scratch, but also repairing them in the field. Without that know-how, Blue Star could never fully claim its place among the stars. Just after midday, a pillar of brilliant light burst through the sky and settled on the manor grounds. Thor strode in moments later, cradling a cask of golden Asgardian mead. Tony, Bruce, he called urgently. I have need of your genius. Tony and Banner exchanged looks. Anything that drew Thor here could only be serious. Come on up to the lab, Tony said. Tell us what's going on. Thor nodded and set the cask on the workbench. He cracked the seal, filling the air with the sweet scent of ambrosia. Then, his expression turning grave, he began to explain the crisis brewing far beyond Earth's orbit and why he needed their help more than ever. Once everyone had poured themselves a glass of wine, the group gathered around the table, settling into their seats. Tony cleared his throat and looked at Thor. So, what happened? Thor met his gaze evenly. Malekith the Dark Elf has awakened. Tony and Banner exchanged puzzled glances. Malekith? Banner repeated. Who's that? Tony leaned back. He's the Lord of the Dark Realm, a warrior so powerful he once fought my grandfather Bor himself. At that moment, Saul set an ancient tome on the table and opened it to a marked page. This is the same Malekith who nearly brought Asgard to its knees centuries ago. Thor studied the faded script. He was one of Bor's greatest adversaries? Exactly, Saul confirmed, tracing a line of runes with his finger. His forces carved out a realm of shadows. He was presumed dead until now. Tony ran a hand through his hair, half in awe, half in frustration. Let me guess, he isn't actually dead? A resurrected threat, Saul replied grimly. one who's lived in the void for millennia. Tony set his glass down, voice low. Between the Destroyer, the Chitauri invasion, and now this ancient dark elf, Asgard really can't catch a break. Damien flipped through the yellowed pages of his grandfather's journal, then looked up at the assembled heroes. My grandfather's generation was caught up in this conflict, he began. I always assumed their enemies had died out decades ago, but it turns out they discovered a way to induce a deep, extended slumber, slowing their aging to near stop. Now that Aether's power is surging again across Blue Star, they've finally awakened, and they're up to something big. A heavy silence fell over the war chamber. Soul's expression grew grave as he stood. Wait a second, he said, fixing Thor with a steady gaze. Isn't this exactly the sort of threat King Odin should be handling? A cabal that survived for thousands of years, now poised to seize our world. We're more than willing to assist, but do we really stand a chance? And what is this ether everyone keeps referring to? Tony Stark raised a hand, stepping forward with a wry half-smile. Good questions. Damien warned us there was a legendary treasure tied to ether, so I knew we'd draw nasty opponents, but this is next level. If these ancient adversaries have truly tapped into raw ether energy, then Odin will have to come out of Asgard. So let's cut to the chase. What do we actually know about ether, and how do we stop them? Damien stepped into the lab's strategy room, where Thor stood by the window, arms folded, and Tony Stark and Bruce Banner crowded around a hollow monitor. The tension in the air was palpable. Tony glanced up first. When Thor arrived last time, he told us Odin couldn't take action, couldn't even stabilize his own power, so he sent Thor in his stead. I believe that's when we finally got the full story. Thor gave a curt nod. My father still struggles with the energies coursing through him. He fears our confrontation with Malekith before he's ready. Damien frowned. That was over a year ago, after the Battle of New York. Are you saying Odin still hasn't mastered his power? Thor's jaw tightened. I don't know the details of his condition. All I know is he's more cautious than ever where Malekith is concerned. Bruce swiveled the hollow display toward them, projections of swirling energy and Asgardian runes. Even so, we have to be prepared. Malekith's ether could topple entire worlds. The real question is, can we stop him? Tony slammed a hand on the table. Yes, if we have a chance at defeating him, we fight, and if we don't, we still have to fight. Damien turned to Bruce. Tell me again, what exactly is this ether? Bruce sighed and tapped a fragment of text floating in midair. It's a primordial force, older than the Nine Realms, older even than the universe itself. According to the records, it can twist reality's very fabric, bending physical laws to its wielder's will. Thor clenched his fists. You're saying it can warp all physical laws? Bruce nodded slowly. That's what the ancient tomes claim, though the science isn't exact. Tony ran a hand through his hair. If Malekith ever fully harnesses that power, it won't just threaten Earth or Asgard. We're talking about the entire universe. A heavy silence settled over the room as each man contemplated the stakes, one more reason why they couldn't afford to fail. Damien watched Thor pace before him, the weight of the news heavy in the air. Finally he spoke. Where is the ether now? Thor steadied himself. It's inside Jane Foster, and she's in Asgard. Dark Elf Malekith has returned. He'll stop at nothing to claim the ether, and if he succeeds, Earth won't be spared. Damien frowned. He'd heard of Asgard's legendary treasures, but this was by far the gravest threat. So how can we help? Thor's eyes met his with urgent intensity. I need your armor, he said. If you accompany me to Asgard, we stand a chance of protecting Jane, and of preventing Malekith from gaining the ether's power. Asgard is already preparing for war. A battle could break out at any moment. Damien squared his shoulders. Tell me what we need to do. I'll suit up right away. Thor let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Relief and determination shone in his gaze. Thank you, Damien. With you by my side, hope remains. Damien knew that Tony, now empowered by the Void Cult's blessing, had become astonishingly strong. And though Dr. Banner still wrestled to keep the Hulk under control, his raw power could tip any battle in their favor. Thor broke the silence with a bright gleam in his eye. I've long dreamed of visiting the legendary realm of Asgard. Tony's smile was immediate. If Malekith isn't expecting us, Earth won't stand a chance. Thor laughed. Then I have no excuse to refuse. Banner nodded, stepping forward. So you both really are willing to help? Absolutely, Tony and Thor replied together. Thor's grin widened. Perfect. Give me up to an hour to make preparations. Tony folded his arms. I'll need Jarvis with me if I'm going all out, so I've got to loop in Pepper. And honestly, I don't know how long this mission will take. He met Thor's excited gaze, and despite the gravity of the coming fight, managed a confident nod. With Asgard on the horizon, they were about to embark on their greatest adventure yet. However, it was obvious that everything was unfolding exactly as Damien had predicted. He couldn't help but sigh inwardly at just how ruthless Damien could be. Then the second update was sent. Chapter 269, A New Opportunity. When Thor stepped onto Blue Star via the Bifrost, Damien was the first to notice. He hadn't expected the Thunder God to arrive so boldly, and with a request for help. After all, in all of Thor's battles before Malekith, he never once called in the Avengers. At first glance, Thor's hesitation made sense. The Avengers roster had been small and fractured, and without Tony Stark's void-enhanced genius, or Bruce Banner in full Hulk mode, they simply lacked the firepower to face Malekith's forces. Stark's old tech often tipped the balance in minor skirmishes, but against a foe of this caliber, it was at best a distraction. As for Dr. Banner, he had grown wary of unleashing the Hulk, haunted by the devastation it could wreak. Everything had changed now. Since receiving the Void's blessing, Tony's intellect and armor had advanced by leaps and bounds. His new designs were more powerful than anything the universe had seen, placing him among its foremost champions. With Stark's resources and Banner's careful guidance, the Avengers were no longer the ragtag band they once were, but a force capable of turning the tide. As Damien watched Thor approach, he realized their chances of victory had just grown far greater than anyone had dared hope. Damien could sense that Banner had changed. His mind was sharper, his strength undeniably greater, though Thor himself had no inkling of just how much Banner had evolved. What Thor did perceive was that Banner was ready, even eager, to embrace the Hulk's power. No wonder he'd turned to Tony for help. Banner's comments as he passed Thor by seemed offhand, but one question nagged at Damien's mind. Was the real battle now raging in Asgard? Observing Asgard's affairs was second nature to him, so Damien resolved to wait patiently, to watch and learn before making his next move. Tony laid out the situation for Pepper as plainly as he could. She understood that the threat Tony faced was so great that even distant Blue Star wouldn't be safe unless this enemy was stopped once and for all. Though her heart ached at the thought of letting him go, she voiced no objection. She trusted his judgment, and more than that, she stood firmly behind his choice to head into the fray. Still, watching the man she loved stride into ever more peril awakened something in her, a determination to grow stronger herself, a truth she had been reluctant to face until now. Damien had joined the Void cult more than 4 years ago. In that time, the Void's power had frozen his body in perpetual youth, extending his lifespan indefinitely. He'd chosen this path simply so he could remain at Tony's side, confident that whenever Tony encountered danger, he would find a way out. As a result, Damien's evolutions progressed slowly. After all this time, he'd only accumulated 206 transformations, well over 100 fewer than Tony. He'd never deliberately directed his changes toward raw strength. His current abilities were the sum of countless small, unfocused shifts. But lately, Damien realized that if he was going to stand beside Tony in a world ruled by powerhouses, he needed to get stronger and fast. "I'll be right back once I've finished my work," Damien promised, straightening the collar of his Void Cult robes. Tony Stark, newly encased in sleek steel armor, studied him with a nod. Asgard's Rainbow Bridge is the fastest way to reach, or return from, Blue Star. Damien, I'll do everything in my power to bring you back in one piece. From the edge of the hangar, Saul watched the exchange with uneasy eyes. He knew that asking Tony for help meant putting the man he trusted most in harm's way, and he was determined to secure whatever assurances it would take to comfort Tony's family. "All right," Pepper said, offering a small, confident smile. "I believe you. Let's get moving. The sooner we find Tony, the sooner we can bring him back to you." Thor released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Pepper's composure was exactly what he needed. He turned to Tony and Banner. "Follow me." In the courtyard of Stark Manor, Thor raised Mjolnir and called out, "Heimdall!" A column of radiant light split the sky, sweeping down and enveloping the trio. In an instant, they vanished. Seconds later, Tony and Banner found themselves standing in a vast, gleaming hall. Pancakes of golden light danced across the towering columns and vaulted ceiling. Tony looked down at his own red and gold armor, then up at the sturdy, gilded plating of the figure before him, and whistled appreciatively. "Nice set of armor," he said. "Very retro-futuristic." Heimdall, clad in polished gold breastplate and bearing his ever-watchful gaze, studied Tony for a moment. Then he nodded. "You wear your armor well, Stark. But tell me, what realm do you hail from?" Damien slipped quietly to one side as Thor took center stage, clearing his throat to gather everyone's attention. "Allow me to introduce you," Thor announced, sweeping an arm toward the colossal, golden-armored figure beside him. "This is Heimdall, Asgard's sentinel and guardian of the Bifrost." Heimdall inclined his head in a courteous bow. His presence seemed to fill the hall with a faint, shimmering light. "His sight spans all 9 realms," Thor continued. "He can peer into any corner of existence, from the frozen wastes of Jotunheim to the fiery forges of Muspelheim. In fact, Heimdall was the first to spot Loki's mischief on Blue Star and alerted us at once." Turning to 2 newcomers, Thor smiled broadly. "And these are our champions from Earth, what you call Blue Star." Tony Stark stepped forward, removing his helmet with a practiced flourish. "Tony Stark, but you can call me Iron Man." Bruce Banner followed, offering a modest nod. "Bruce Banner, though you probably know me better as the Hulk." Heimdall's stern features softened into a warm smile. "It is an honor to meet you both. The 9 realms face a threat unlike any before. Your willingness to join this defense is most welcome." Stark laughed and tapped his chest plate. "Glad to help. Sorry for any early previews of the suit's inner workings. I imagine you've seen more than one awkward moment." Banner shifted, brushing a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I'm sure you caught a few of my, less presentable transformations." "Embarrassment is a small price to pay," Heimdall said gently. "Blue Star is as vital as any realm here. When darkness rises, we must all stand together." Damien watched the group exchange determined glances. Alliances had been forged, introductions made. Now there was only the looming challenge ahead. Heimdall's golden eyes softened as he regarded Damien. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Banner," he said deliberately. "Over the past year, I have witnessed your tireless efforts to master the power of the Hulk. Now that you finally hold sway over him, you must understand, though that power has brought you hardship, it remains your greatest asset." He paused, measuring Damien's reaction. "Tell me, can you truly summon the Hulk at will and command him?" Damien met his gaze steadily. "After enough training, yes. I can transform whenever I choose." Thor, who had been standing nearby, blinked in astonishment. A broad grin spread across his face as he clapped Damien on the shoulder. "That's wonderful news. With your control, our odds just improved tremendously." He chuckled, shaking his head in relief. "I brought you along, hoping Tony Stark could help you manage the Hulk's rage. Finding you here, already in command of your own transformation, well, that's better than any Stark tech." He gave Damien an approving nod. "I didn't expect you to be such a reliable wild card, but now that you are, I'd say we have every reason to be optimistic." Whether Banner can be of help really depends on the circumstances, and on him not causing more trouble than he solves. Now that he can shift forms at will, though, the whole situation has changed. I've just sent the 3rd update. Chapter 270, Loki Deserves a Beating. Damien looked at Soul's expectant smile and realized the invitation was more formality than favor, but he didn't mind. After everything he'd been through, being uneasy was his default state. "All right," he said, falling in behind Thor and Tony. "Lead the way." Thor beamed. "First, you'll meet my father, and Jane. Then I'll show you all Asgard has to offer." Pumped with excitement by Thor's confidence, Tony Stark clapped Damien on the shoulder and followed. Together, the 3 of them strode out of the temple onto the Rainbow Bridge. Beneath their feet, the arching pathway shimmered in shifting bands of color, stretching across the void toward a magnificent shrine that seemed to hover between sky and stars. Damien inhaled sharply. Asgard's architecture was a breathtaking blend of ancient grandeur and futuristic innovation. Colossal stone pillars carved with glowing runes stood beside fluid, metallic structures that pulsed with energy. Everywhere he looked, myth and technology coexisted in perfect harmony. It was as if he'd stepped straight into a saga where swords and starships were equally at home. Tony, who'd already seen Xandar's wonders and countless other worlds, studied every detail with his usual engineer's eye. They've taken every piece of Norse legend and fused it with next-generation tech, he noted. Earth's going to need decades, centuries, to catch up. Damien stayed quiet, drinking it all in. He'd never imagined a place like this, a realm where legends lived and cosmic machinery hummed. On the Rainbow Bridge, he felt both out of his depth and utterly alive. He knew Loki wouldn't let them cross unchallenged. The trickster god always had a scheme up his sleeve. But for now, Damien squared his shoulders and kept his gaze fixed on the glowing shrine ahead. Our Loki could wait. There was plenty more wonder and danger still to explore. The technology of the universe far outstrips anything on Blue Star. Banner surveyed his surroundings and let out a low sigh. Asgard was nothing more than a small part of the cosmic tapestry. No matter how unsophisticated a civilization might seem on its own world, once it traded ideas and resources with the wider universe, its technological level would inevitably surpass that of Blue Star. We in Asgard aren't celebrated for machines or gadgets. We're known for our gods and the divine gifts they wield, as well as the many forms of magic at their command. When it comes to pure technological might, nobody beats the Kree Empire or the Xandar Empire. Thor nodded in agreement. Both have perfected what are called optical brains, advanced devices that rival any mystical power. They don't rely on divinity or incantations. They use hard science to manipulate energy, strengthen themselves, and even reshape matter. Sensing Banner's interest, Thor continued with a note of pride. As for true divine authority, that title belongs to my father, Odin, the All-Father. And when it comes to magic, there's my mother, Frigga. She may not match the Ancient One of Blue Star, whom few have ever seen, but she's counted among the greatest sorceresses in the known universe. Is the Xandar Empire the same planet Tony mentioned earlier? Damien asked, frowning thoughtfully. I'm not exactly sure what Tony told you, but it sounds familiar. Thor's eyes lit up. He glanced at Tony, then back to Damien, and nodded. That's right. Xandar is the heart of the Xandar Empire. I'll make a point of visiting when I get the chance. Damien, a scientist as much as he was the Hulk, couldn't hide his excitement. The prospect of seeing Xandar's legendary technology stirred his curiosity. I'd love to study their breakthroughs firsthand, he admitted. Tony flashed a confident grin. Don't worry, as long as Earth stays secure, I'll book us passage. The three of them chatted eagerly as they strolled toward the Asgardian temple. Just then, a familiar figure stepped into their path, wearing a smirk that was half amusement, half mischief. Well, look who's here, Loki drawled, throwing back his shoulders. Iron Man himself, Tony Stark, the great innovator of the Cult of the Void. Despite their past quarrels on the Void world, Loki's tone in his home realm of Asgard was all polite mockery. Tony simply arched an eyebrow, Damien braced himself, and Thor let out a low chuckle as they prepared for whatever antics the trickster god had in store. Damien's blade glinted in the pale Asgardian light as he squared off against Loki, who seemed to ooze faux hospitality. Do you really think I'm too afraid to strike you, just because we're in Asgard? Loki's voice curled with mock warmth. Damien's eyes narrowed. Don't forget where you are. My father is watching, from the temple above. At the name Odin, Loki's confident grin faltered for the first time. He lifted a hand in feigned deference. Your father, the All-Father Odin, is renowned across the 9 realms. Even if we came to blows, he'd dismiss it as mere squabbling between juniors. He circled Damien, voice light and teasing. When you're worshipped throughout the cosmos, a little spat on the palace grounds is hardly worth notice. Damien stepped forward, gaze steady, a cool smile curling at his lips. High in the Temple of the Kings, Odin sat upon his throne of ivory and marble. He could feel their every word, see every edge of steel. He pressed a hand to his temple and sighed. If he intervened, he'd be called petty. If he stayed silent, he'd be cold. Muttering into the hushed expanse, he spoke to an empty hall. Brother, lend me a hand here. This is Asgard, after all. Damien crossed his arms and fixed Loki with a cool stare. Touch me, and you're touching my father as well. Loki's lips curved into a sly smile. He knew exactly what Damien had just done. By invoking his father's name, Damien had forced the older man to swallow any immediate retaliation for fear of losing face. So Loki simply shrugged and looked over at Thor. Come on, brother. Don't mind him. Damien just talks too much. Thor hesitated. He wouldn't have minded seeing Loki get into trouble, but since Loki had called for help, he couldn't turn away. He stepped between them, voice low but firm. All right, Loki, but mark my words. If you insult Damien again, you'll regret it. Damien scoffed. Insult me? When have I ever been weird? You really know how to spin things. He glanced from Thor to Loki, forcing a half smile. Seriously, though, thank you both for coming today. I wouldn't have made a special trip just to pay respects to my father if I didn't have something else in mind. Loki raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what might that be? Damien's gaze sharpened. After you met him, I thought you'd finally be interested in talking to me. Loki threw back his head and laughed softly. Naturally, Loki's mind is far keener than yours. You'd do well to remember that. Thor shook his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. Always full of yourself, aren't you, little brother? The tension eased slightly as the three stood there, entangled in family rivalries, reluctant respect, and the unspoken promise of what was to come. Tony paused, waiting for Banner's cue. When Banner gave him a slight nod, Tony exhaled and fell in step behind Thor, with Banner close on his heels. They trailed the two brothers across the crumbling stones toward the temple. Once they were out of earshot, Loki leaned toward Thor. You promised you'd let me in on your plans, yet here you are, hauling Stark into this without a word. Thor flashed him a wry grin. I believed we'd sworn off secrets between us. Loki's lip curled. You didn't know if they'd help, so you just invited them anyway. Thor shrugged. I rescued them. I intended to tell you, once I was sure they'd agree. Loki scoffed. But you already knew they'd come, didn't you? Thor's grin only widened, and Loki fell silent, tension crackling in his sharp glare. His brother was changing, growing more inscrutable, less straightforward than the Thor he once knew. Tony and Banner exchanged a glance. They pretended not to notice the brewing discord and kenned their pace to keep up. At the temple's thresholds, they paused, struck by the grandeur before them. Towering columns carved with ancient runes soared upward to vaulted ceilings, while brass sconces held flickering torches that cast dancing shadows over intricate mosaic floors. The hush inside the hall pressed gently on their shoulders. Tony straightened his suit jacket. Even Banner's normally casual posture grew more formal. Together, they stepped into the temple's solemn embrace, ready for whatever awaited them within. Chapter 271, A Personal Standpoint. As Damien and Bruce Banner crested the final stretch of the road, they spotted a white-haired elder seated on a grand throne. Clad in gleaming armor and gripping a divine spear, the figure radiated an overwhelming, godlike presence. Odin's icy gaze fell upon Tony Stark as he stepped forward. Tony Stark, the All-Father's voice rumbled, you are of the Void Cult, yet now you offer your aid to Asgard. And what of Cassidine's position in all this? Tony inclined his head respectfully. Rumors alone spoke of Odin's unmatched power, ruler of the 9 realms, venerated as a god among gods. Even here to assist, Tony knew that proper deference was essential. This battle concerns the defense of the 9 realms' blue star, he replied. My allegiance lies with its people, not with any void religion. I merely wish to contribute to the coming war. Bruce followed Tony's lead, casting his own head downward. So Cassidine is aware of these developments, but chooses to remain uninvolved? He asked quietly. Odin regarded them both in silence, his penetrating eyes measuring their resolve. After a long moment, he spoke. Since Thor had gone in search of Tony Stark, Cassidine now held sway on the planet known as Blue Star. He must have foreseen Malekith's awakening and set his own designs in motion. Odin, eager to learn where the god of the void stood, called for his insights, and yet, were it not for Cassidine's advancing age and the precarious nature of his void-wrought power, none in Asgard would dare question him. No one can fathom the will of the great god of the void, Odin declared from his high seat. Damien stepped forward, keeping his tone measured. Your Majesty, I speak only for myself. I bear no commission from Cassidine or from any other. Odin's single piercing eye fixed on him. Then what, precisely, do you mean? Damien held the Allfather's gaze. I am not here to dodge your questions. I simply wish to speak as a friend, not as an official envoy. A faint smile touched Odin's lips. You are my guests, and you both pledged to aid Asgard against Malekith's darkness. Would I treat my friends harshly? You are companions of my two sons. Let them show you our hospitality. Damien bowed deeply. At his side, Tony Stark offered Odin a grateful nod. Thank you, King Odin, for your kindness. In the vast throne hall of Asgard, Tony Stark stood before the All-Father, Odin, his posture confident, even as the golden light of the chamber glinted off his armor. Behind him, Bruce Banner scanned the vaulted ceiling, still trying to make sense of the cosmic grandeur that surrounded them. Odin's one good eye regarded the two humans coolly, then swept to his sons. Thor, Loki, he intoned, see that our guests are treated with the courtesy befitting ambassadors of Midgard. At once, Father, Thor answered, bowing deeply. Loki offered only a nod, his sharp gaze never leaving Tony. As the two princes turned to shepherd their guests out of the hall, Loki couldn't contain his curiosity. The instant they were out of earshot, he shot a question at Thor. What did you do, brother? How did Father learn of Stark's dealings with the Void God cult? Thor halted on the polished stone floor and looked back, his expression earnest. I didn't tell him. Not a word. I swore Odin to secrecy. Loki folded his arms, eyebrows raised. Then how does he already know who Tony Stark is, and that he once trespassed into that forbidden temple? Tony Stark, overhearing their aside, stepped forward with a grin. Let me guess? Divine espionage? Odin has spies everywhere, doesn't he? He shrugged as if brushing off the notion. I'm not exactly subtle, especially when weaving my own, diplomatic webs. Thor rolled his eyes good-naturedly. Our father's reach is long. He's chief of the Aesir, lord of storms. It's little wonder he keeps tabs on anyone who visits places best left unvisited. Bruce Banner let out a soft chuckle. So in Asgard, Big Brother really is watching. Loki shot Bruce a sidelong look that might have conveyed equal parts annoyance and amusement. Welcome to the realm of gods, Banner. Next time, maybe send Odin a formal invitation before you crash his front gates. With that, the four of them, Thor and Loki leading, Tony and Bruce following, descended the wide marble steps of the throne room. The corridors of the temple were quiet now, lit by flickering braziers. Thor kept pace with Bruce, chatting about wonders of Yggdrasil's root worlds, while Loki fell into step beside Tony, his interest piqued. As they walked toward their respective quarters, Tony turned to Loki with a wry smile. You know, if you're going to spy on me, a guy appreciates a little heads up. Loki considered this. I suppose I'll take that under advisement, Stark. Behind them, Thor glanced back, a satisfied smile on his face. Asgard's secrets would remain intact for now, and two Midgardians were already beginning to feel a strange sort of welcome in the halls of the gods. That's why you didn't look surprised when your identity came out just now, Tony quipped, folding his arms. No argument from your father, huh? Consider yourself lucky, Loki. Thor glanced between his brother and Tony. Frankly, I don't care much about father's mood, as long as you never betray me. Loki felt a gentle warmth stir in his chest, but he kept his expression cool. Apart from the battle in New York, when have I ever truly done anything wrong? Bruce Banner leaned forward. You almost died at the Void Cult, he reminded him. Loki opened his mouth to hush them, but Tony cut in with an easy grin. Nothing major, Tony said, just Loki showing off at the Void Cult and nearly getting himself killed. Luckily, I was there to pull him out of trouble. Thor relaxed, realizing their father already knew about the excursion. All right, Loki, he said. What exactly is this Void Cult? Banner's curiosity was piqued. Yeah, he urged. You almost died there. Come on, tell us everything. Damien's warning rang in Loki's ears long after the words were spoken. That place is dangerous, Damien had said, folding his arms. Don't go there unless you want trouble. Loki bristled at the caution. As the second prince of Asgard, he'd swaggered into the Void God's temple, expecting at least a courtesy blessing, only to be turned away without so much as a glance at his tricks. No one in Midgard held the Void Cult in high regard. He knew their scorn well enough. Still, he disliked being lectured by a mortal. Tony Stark only chuckled at Loki's sour expression. You and me both, he said. But let's leave the Void behind. We've got better prospects ahead. With that, the small band, Damien, Loki, Tony, and Saul, made their way through winding stone corridors toward the Temple of Sol. Sunlight streamed in through stained glass windows as they approached the outer courtyard. There, amid columns carved with solar symbols, stood a familiar figure. Jane Foster straightened, disbelief flashing across her face. "Tony Stark?" Tony carefully lifted the faceplate of his gleaming armor. "Guilty as charged. Long time no see." Jane paused, studying him. "I haven't laid eyes on you in years. You haven't changed a bit." She reached up to touch her own cheek, confusion in her eyes. "Then again, this world has real gods. Maybe the magic around here keeps me looking young." Tony let out a soft laugh. "If that's true, I'd say it's working on you." He stepped forward, offering her his armored gauntlet. "Welcome back to Midgard, Jane." As Jane took his hand, Damien glanced at Saul and Loki, then back at the two old friends. Whatever challenges lay ahead, be it divine intrigues or something darker in the shadows, this reunion felt like the best possible start. "That actually makes sense," Jane said at last, glancing at Thor and Loki, who had never been particularly fond of her, and finally relenting. "Thor, Loki, this is Dr. Bruce Banner." Thor gave a polite nod. "Hello." Banner, surprisingly youthful-looking, offered a shy wave. Jane did a double take. He looked barely in his 20s, nothing like him, the older man in the files. She smiled. "Dr. Banner, I understand you're hosting the power of the ether." He blinked, surprised by her insight. "Yes, have you had a chance to study its capabilities?" Banner's eyes lit up as he leaned forward. Jane couldn't help but step back when his enthusiasm grew almost palpable. "Easy there, Bruce," she teased. "Don't overwhelm me." Tony stepped in, draping an arm around Banner's shoulders and guiding him a few paces back. "Jane, he means no harm. Bruce is a scientist through and through. Hearing about the ether's magical properties got him a bit carried away." Jane gave an amused shrug and invited Banner to follow her. As she launched into a careful explanation of the ether's mysteries, Banner listened intently, hanging on every word. This is update number 5. Thanks for reading. Please vote and subscribe. Chapter 272, 3 Paths. "He's a scientist?" Jane echoed in astonishment. Could he be the same Dr. Bruce Banner who was reported killed in that experimental accident? Tony added, turning to Saul for confirmation. Saul studied Banner's face for a long moment. "I can't say for certain, but Banner was indeed a doctor." Thor, who'd heard little of Banner's disappearance, nodded thoughtfully. "The world is full of marvels. Those rumored missing, or even dead, sometimes reappear." Jane stared at Banner, her eyes wide. Bruce Banner was legendary in every scientific circle, his intellect unmatched by almost anyone. As an astronomer, she'd tracked every rumor about him, yet for years, everyone believed he'd perished in that catastrophic lab accident. And now here he stood, alive, and looking younger than ever, despite whatever trials he'd faced. "I never meant for you to die," Jane blurted out, her voice trembling. "It was supposed to be an accident. I'm so sorry." Instantly aware of her words, she pressed her hands together and bowed her head in apology, her guilt plain on her face. Bruce Banner waved off Jane's ire with an easy smile. "Don't worry, most people react the same way when they find out I'm not dead. Let's sit and talk. Honestly, I'm fascinated by this ether power you've discovered." Tony Stark folded his arms, eyebrow raised. "You claim your ether can bend every law of physics? How is that even possible?" At that moment, Damien strode into Sol's hall, flanked by a few curious onlookers. He paused before the others, rubbing his temples as if still getting a handle on his own excitement. "I'd like to study the ether inside me," Damien began, voice steady but urgent. "The problem is it's wildly unstable right now. I can't control it well enough to run precise tests. When it first manifested, it appeared as a glowing sphere of red energy. Within that bubble, the normal rules of physics just vanished. Space shifted, gravity flipped, you name it. It was like two worlds collided and overlapped." He took a breath, locking eyes with Bruce and Tony. "Inside that distorted field, I lifted an entire car as if it weighed nothing, like lifting a feather. I want to understand how far these changes go and what we can do with them." Jane exchanged a look with Stark and Banner, her expression a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. The three of them settled at the long table in Sol's hall, prepared to unravel the mysteries of Damien's extraordinary ether. Ether is a form of energy beyond any scientific explanation, raw, untapped potential. If humanity could truly understand and control it, our technology would leap forward in ways we can't yet imagine. Jane glanced at Thor. Brother, where does this power come from? Tony Stark's eyes lit up at the question, and he turned eagerly to Thor, but the Asgardian simply stared back, momentarily at a loss. There's no clear record in any of our tomes about the ether's origin, he admitted. But Tony Stark, Loki interjected with a sly smile, surely you know of something akin to this power? Tony and Bruce Banner exchanged a quick glance. Cosmic cube, they said simultaneously. Loki nodded. The cube can connect any point in the universe, and it holds virtually limitless energy. Tony grinned, recalling his own breakthrough. In fact, it was studying the cube that led me to synthesize a new element from my father's notes. Who knows what the ether might teach us? Damien paced the length of the chamber, dark eyes alight with excitement. The ether's power and the cosmic cube belong to the same class of artifact, he declared. Father did leave us ancient tomes to study, but as we all know, books often only scratch the surface. Chasing every theory about their origin isn't as important as what's happening now. The ether has shattered its seal and taken form in our world, and that change alone will draw out the galaxy's greatest players. Loki inclined his head in agreement. Having wielded the cosmic cube himself, he knew better than most the havoc such power could wreak. He'd to witness the ether firsthand, but its reputation for raw, unpredictable force was unmistakable. In that moment, Loki remembered why Thanos had dispatched him to Earth, to retrieve the cube before anyone else could. If the ether proved as formidable as the cube, and word of its appearance began to spread, Thanos would be impossible to dissuade. Thanos will come, Loki said quietly. He covets ultimate power, and this could rival anything he's ever known. Damien stopped by a tall window, gazing out at the swirling clouds of interstellar dust beyond. Then we prepare, he replied. If the ether is to be claimed, we must claim it first, before Thanos or anyone else can set foot on its threshold. Loki met his gaze, eyes narrowed in determination. Agreed, we'll need allies and intelligence we don't yet possess. But if anyone can master the ether, it's us. Together, they turned from the window, already plotting the next move in a cosmic game of power and betrayal, one that would shape the fate of the universe itself. Loki was speaking only in speculation, so no one argued, yet. Their priority remained the same, repel Malekith's invasion and stop his plan before it could succeed. Still, Loki's offhand remark about the ether had sown a seed of curiosity among the world's greatest heroes. Tony Stark and Bruce Banner exchanged meaningful looks. Would Damien want the ether for himself? Tony figured Damien must have anticipated the ether's return long ago, and perhaps already knew where it lay sealed. With Damien's resources and cunning, recovering it shouldn't be impossible. Then again, the ether is an Asgardian relic, and Odin still sits on the throne of Asgard. It's entirely plausible that even Damien hasn't managed to wrest it from the gods. For Tony, however, the lure of the ether was irresistible. If he could study its power and incorporate it into his designs, his technology would advance by leaps and bounds, becoming virtually impossible for anyone else to replicate. Stark Industries would reap the rewards, and his allies in the Void God Sect and Blue Star would benefit as well. It would be the ultimate 3-in-1 payoff. There was just one problem. The ether now dwelled within Jane Foster's body. As long as it remained there, Tony couldn't simply snatch it away. And so the race to secure the ether and protect the realms from Malekith's dark ambitions had truly begun. Damien kept his focus razor-sharp. First, protect Jane Foster at all costs. Second, look for any opportunity to study whatever strange energy she'd encountered. Once Jane was safe, he could worry about the rest. He glanced at Tony and Loki. Besides the Bifrost, does Asgard have any other entrances or exits? Tony tapped his chin, then turned to Loki. And where do you think Malekith will come through? The moment those words left Tony's lips, Bruce Banner, Thor, and Jane all looked expectantly at Loki. The trickster god adopted an air of exaggerated innocence. Really? You don't know? Tony challenged. Last time you visited the Void, you didn't exactly stroll in through the front door. Loki gave a nonchalant shrug. There are 3 known ways to travel to Asgard. He paused to let his teammates lean in. First, a teleport over the Bifrost itself. Second, piloting a starship, using an Asgardian star chart to navigate through space. Third, slipping in and out via a secret passage. Option 1, Loki continued, requires Heimdall's explicit permission or a direct command from my father, so we can rule that out. Option 2, Heimdall watches the main celestial gates. That leaves only the third, a hidden tunnel carved behind the east rampart. Very few Asgardians even know of its existence. Thor frowned. You're sure this passage leads all the way to the vaults? Absolutely, Loki said, a gleam in his eye. It's how messengers once traveled in secret, and how criminals once escaped detection. If Malekith plans to strike when we least expect it, that will be his route. Damien nodded. Protect Jane. Then stop Malekith at this hidden entrance before it was too late. Logically, Malekith can't know exactly where the secret passage is hidden, Damien muttered, pacing in the dimly lit war room. That means he'll most likely come through the main gate, giving us more than enough time to set up our defenses. Loki nodded, frowning as he studied the battle map spread across the table. Agreed, but we shouldn't rule out other routes entirely. He might probe the outer walls or try a feint near the stables first. We need scouts along every potential approach. Damien met his friend's gaze. Very well. Send word to bolster the main entrance, but place pickets at the side roads and send a cavalry patrol toward the forest's edge. If Malekith does try something unexpected, we'll be ready. Loki tapped a slender finger against the map. And we'll keep the passage guarded in secret. If he discovers its true location, all this preparation will be for nothing. Damien gave a grim nod. Then let's get to work. Chapter 273. Nothing more than that. Damien stood silently at the edge of the war room, listening as Tony Stark squared off against Loki, the once exiled Asgardian prince. Tony's eyes flickered with curiosity and caution. Malekith, Lord of the Dark Elves, Tony began, must be a contemporary of your grandfather Bor, a seasoned warrior with countless battles under his belt. He leaned forward. How much do you think he actually knows about us Asgardians? Loki's pale lips curved into a smirk. He made no move to reveal the hidden passage Tony sought. Instead, he answered the question with a touch of theatrical nonchalance. I can't say for sure how much Malekith knows, but imagine you had slept for centuries and then awoke, determined to conquer Asgard, your ancient rival. You'd want a full appraisal of their military might before charging in, wouldn't you? He folded his arms. Given our long history, I doubt it would take more than 3 days to get a reliable overview. The gods of Asgard are famous. We'd simply review their most recent exploits and be ready. Tony shook his head. When you marshaled the Chitauri against Earth, you spent months gathering intel, siphoning data from Hawkeye's network, probing S.H.I.E.L.D. archives, everything. Loki chuckled softly. Preparation's never a wasted effort. Damien watched them both, absorbing every word. He knew that facing Malekith, or any enemy, would require more than brute strength. It demanded foresight, strategy, and an unrelenting thirst for information. Tony Stark was just too formidable and ruthless. He never gave Loki a chance to set his alienation scheme in motion, so the plan collapsed before it ever really began. 3 days already? Tony's voice was flat, but his eyes glinted with sudden realization. Miss Jane, Loki asked coolly, when did you first tap into the ether's power? At the mention of the ether, Tony's jaw tightened. 3 days. Jane's breath caught. She glanced at Tony's darkening expression. Relax, she urged. As long as Malekith doesn't know the secret, any invasion attempt would show up on Heimdall's watch. Loki leaned back against the wall, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Heimdall hasn't sounded the alarm, so for now, there's nothing to fear. Asgard's defenses are stronger than you give them credit for. Tony didn't look convinced. Loki's smile widened. Speaking of defenses, there's a problem downstairs. A certain prisoner, one of my guests, has slipped his bonds. Before Tony could exhale, a furious clamor rose from the corridor outside. You took custody of someone else? Tony shot to his feet and spun to face Thor, his impatience barely contained. What's happening out there? Captain Saul stood at the head of the long council table, the carved runes on its surface glowing faintly in the torchlight. Around him sat Thor and Tony, two of Asgard's most illustrious champions. Saul cleared his throat. Disorder in the Nine Realms is nothing new, he said evenly. It falls to us to capture those who sow chaos and return them to our dungeons. Tony shifted uneasily in his seat. What is it, Saul? You sound troubled. Before Saul could answer, Thor leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Saul, I've heard rumors that prisoners have been escaping your vaults. Is there any truth to it? Saul's expression darkened. Escape? That's impossible. Every inmate we confine has their powers sealed. No one walks out of Asgardian cells unless we deliberately restore their abilities. Thor let out a low chuckle, betraying his confidence in Asgard's security. Then we needn't worry, our prison walls are impregnable. His reassurance was cut short by the sudden thrum of boots on marble and the distant roar of summoned troops. Saul and Thor exchanged alarmed glances as the sounds grew louder, echoing through the corridors outside. Thor sprang to his feet and sprinted to the balcony doors. Below, lines of armored soldiers hurried into formation, spears and blades catching the light. Above them, sleek Asgardian starships descend, their engines humming with urgency. I'm going down to the dungeon, Thor announced, eyes blazing. I want to see for myself how someone could have broken out. Before he could step onto the balcony, Saul hurried after him, one hand on Thor's arm. Wait, Thor. You're about to make the same mistake I nearly did. You're overlooking the one thing every escapee shared. He paused, voice grave, as the assembled soldiers fell silent, waiting for him to finish. Outside, the first clatter of steel on steel heralded that something, or someone, was already moving through the twisting passages of Asgard's deepest prison. Everyone, leave the dungeon alone for now. Tony's voice carried over the assembled heroes. Loki folded his arms. If you truly believe a prison break here is impossible, then this jailbreak must have been planned all along. Bruce Banner adjusted his glasses, brows furrowed. Malekith could arrive any minute. There'll be casualties down there. No doubt about it. Natasha stepped forward. Our first priority is protecting Dr. Jane Foster and the ether she carries. After that, we'll make for the halls of Odin. Steve Rogers added, Malekith wants that power. He won't stop until he has it. Tony shook his head. Exactly. Don't let him bait us into a trap, lure the tiger out of its den, and pick us off. At that, Tony grabbed Sif's wrist, just as she was moving to join the charge. His grip was firm but controlled. Loki, take Sif. Gather the Asgardian guard and secure the dungeon. Sif bristled, but Loki gave a crisp nod. Thor, who'd started forward, felt the sudden pull from Tony's armored hand. The Allfather's son glimpsed Tony's determined glare and drew back, breathing out a low roar of acceptance. I'll handle it. Loki glanced between Thor and his brother's uncertain reflection. And me? What's my role here? Bruce caught Loki's eye. Tony, suit up and get Dr. Foster out of harm's way. Bring her straight to the palace. We'll meet you there. Tony released Sif, stepping back. His gauntlet hummed to life. He offered Bruce a curt nod. On it, big guy. With that, the team sprang into motion, Thor charging the dungeon steps, Loki marshalling Asgardian warriors, and Tony racing off to shield Jane Foster from the coming storm. Damien's range of motion was limited in Hulk form, but no enemy would dare get close enough to threaten Jane while he was guarding her. All right, Damien agreed, nodding. Time to transform? Jane stared in bewilderment as Damien's normally handsome features began to turn green and his frame swelled monstrously. Thor, Tony said, keeping one eye on his friend's metamorphosis, you and Damien go find King Odin. With him on our side, Malekith won't dare make a move. I'll be there in a minute, Thor replied, striding forward. Tony didn't waste another second. He tapped furiously at his gauntlet's controls, bringing Jarvis online. Without his AI, the Iron Man suit would be dangerously underpowered. He'd meant to mask his presence as Jarvis and wait for the enemy, but Malekith had arrived far sooner than expected. Almost got it, Tony muttered, fingers dancing over the interface. Let's move, Thor, Damien rumbled, effortlessly scooping Jane into one massive arm. Though confused, she instinctively wrapped her arms around his thick bicep for safety. Mjolnir in hand, Thor led the way up the temple steps, thunder rumbling behind them as they raced to stand before Odin's throne. Damien couldn't fly, but he could easily clear 100 meters in a single bound. His body was astonishingly limber, and he used his tremendous strength to vault from one spire to the next, keeping pace with Thor's thunderous stride. When Thor caught sight of Damien rushing alongside him, his eyes widened in both surprise and admiration. Suddenly, alarms shrieked throughout Asgard. At the heart of the shrine, the protective barrier began to rise. just in time, it seemed, until a wave of enemy ships dove through the sky. The barrier sputtered, its dome incomplete, and or it could fully seal the temple. The vessels slammed into it, shattering sections of the deflector field. Hatches burst open, and dark elves swarmed out, blades flashing in the courtyard's pale light. "Malekith!" Thor bellowed, fury cracking his voice. The sky answered with a deafening roll of thunder, and lightning leapt from Mjolnir in blinding arcs. Dozens of dark elves collapsed, their armor melting under the godly wrath. Damien landed beside Thor on the marble floor, grit on his brow. He reached for the war god's shoulder. "Thor, don't lose your head," he urged. "We need to protect the shrine, together." Chapter 10. The most important thing now is to reunite with your father, Odin. Damien heard the thunderous roar, felt the air crackle with fury, and watched as lightning split the sky behind him. He shouted, trying to be heard over the chaos, but his eyes never strayed from the carnage unfolding below. Dark elves poured through the palace gates, slaughtering Asgard's guard with brutal efficiency. Every instinct in Damien's body raged to join the fight, but he forced himself to hold back. Slaying a few soldiers won't stop Malekith's plan, he reminded himself. Only by cutting the head off the serpent, in this case Malekith himself, could they truly save Asgard. All these rampaging elves were merely pawns. Thor, mid-flight, heard Damien's words, and his storm-lit eyes cleared. Without another word, the two of them angled toward the palace temple, its gilded spires rising against the roiling clouds. But before they could land, a scene unfolded that froze them both. A sleek, dark spacecraft hovered just above the courtyard. Its ramp lowered with a hiss, and stepping out came a figure in obsidian armor. His face was a grotesque vision, one half bone white, the other half coal black, split down the middle like a living mask. The courtyard around him erupted into violence as dark elves swarmed the Asgardian defenders. The palace soldiers fought valiantly, but they were outmatched. Each time a dark elf tossed one of their strange grenades, a glowing orb crackling with alien energy, a vacuum sucked in everything nearby before detonating in a sphere of obliterating force. Marble pillars collapsed, shields splintered, and warriors were swallowed by the explosive shock. Damien and Thor hovered at the edge of the massacre, their eyes locked on the armored figure. This was no lieutenant, it was Malekith himself. The air around him twisted with icy malice. Thor's hammer crackled into being, and Damien's fists glowed with burgeoning power. Side by side, they readied themselves for the battle that would decide Asgard's fate. The time for hesitation was over. Damien's voice cut through the chaos. "Malekith, die!" Thor's eyes blazed with fury as he fixed his gaze on the Dark Elf King striding toward him, flanked by hulking warriors. "You dare challenge the grandson of Bor?" Malekith's lips curled into a mocking sneer at the sight of Thor's enchanted hammer, Mjolnir. He showed no fear. With icy calm, he shouted to his minions, "Banner, take Jane and get her out of here. I'll handle him." Bruce Banner hesitated, glancing up at Thor's stricken face, but Tony Stark's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Protect Jane, no matter what." Banner nodded grimly and scooped Jane Foster into his arms. They lifted off amid a swirl of green gamma light and retreated toward the sky. Thor's grief and anger writhed together, but he knew Banner was right. Jane's safety came first. High above, Banner angled for escape, Jane's hand trailing against his chest. Below, Malekith's pale eyes glowed with satisfaction. He spotted the pulse of the ether within Jane, an irresistible prize. "Seize them," he barked. The Dark Elf captain, clad in shadowy black armor, sprang into action, racing after Banner with ruthless speed. Banner braced himself, but the thought of a single blow risking Jane's life stopped him cold. Hovering several feet off the ground, Bruce grit his teeth. "Stay behind me, Jane," he whispered. But Jane's eyes were already blazing, clutching the ether's power within her. She whispered back, "No, we fight together." Below them, Thor clenched Mjolnir tighter, thunder roaring in his veins. He charged, lightning crackling along his armor, ready to protect his friends and defy Malekith's dark designs once and for all. Damien didn't hesitate. With a single casual slap, he shattered the towering pillar of enchanted stone. Shards flew in all directions, one of them striking the cursed warrior squarely and sending him staggering backward. Without missing a beat, Damien planted both feet on the ground, vaulted himself upward more than 300 meters, and rocketed off toward Tony. The cursed warrior clutched at his armor, eyes wide. He stumbled back a dozen paces, breath hissing through gritted teeth. What on earth was that? From a short distance away, Malekith's amusement turned to alarm as he watched Damien's raw power erupt. Now is not the time for distractions, he snapped. Almost on cue, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, came hurtling through the sky like a thunderbolt. Anticipating the blow, Malekith summoned a sphere of crackling black energy in his palm, expanding it into a shimmering barrier. The hammer struck with the force of a gale, and a roar of thunder rattled the air. The impact drove Malekith's feet deep into the cracked earth, the barrier quivering under the assault. For the first time, the Dark Lord's lips curled into something resembling respect. His once dismissive gaze sharpened. He straightened his shoulders, readying himself for whatever would come next. Chapter: Warrior of the Curse. Malekith knew better than to face Thor directly before he'd claimed the power of ether, so he bellowed for backup. At once, the cursed warrior, now revealed as Damien, stepped between them, sword drawn. "You can't defeat me," he taunted Thor. "What hope do you have against a true warrior of the curse?" Thor cracked a confident grin at Malekith's plea for help and charged forward, Mjolnir crackling with thunder. With a single, powerful swing, he aimed to crush the sorcerer. But Damien didn't even flinch. He seized the hammer's haft with one ironclad hand, meeting the blow head-on. Lightning exploded around Damien's grip, rattling his bones, yet he stood firm, unbowed. Thor's smile vanished as he struggled to wrench his weapon free. Before he could recover his stance, Damien's left fist shot out like a piston. The blow landed squarely on Thor's chest and hurled him backward into the stone wall behind him. The god of thunder slumped to the floor, winded but unbroken, his armor dented and his hands still trembling on the hammer's handle from the sheer force. Damien straightened, eyes blazing with dark resolve. In that moment, it became terrifyingly clear. This unassuming champion of the curse was a force unlike any Thor or Malekith had ever faced. "Looks like this one's your enforcer." Thor cracked and unclenched his fists, willing the pins and needles in his knuckles to fade. Before him stood the cursed warrior, Damien, clad in blackened steel that seemed to swallow the light. Behind Damien, Malekith watched without a flicker of emotion. "Among Asgard's gods, you've always been famed for your strength," Thor said, voice tight. "Yet one strike from Damien leaves my hand throbbing. He's unlike any foe I've faced." He shifted his gaze down to the glittering belt of power around his waist, its runes flickering with untapped magic. Pure muscle might not suffice. He'd need every ounce of Asgardian sorcery at his command. "I'll find Jane," he continued, "and Damien will see to it she never draws breath again." Malekith gave him a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Did you ask my permission first?" Without waiting for an answer, he nodded once to Damien, who turned and strode off into the shadows. Malekith's voice followed, cool and certain. "I can sense her etheric signature. She won't slip through my grasp." Thor's pride flared as he watched them go. With a bellow that shook the rafters, he hurled Mjolnir, a whirling bolt of gleaming iron, straight at the dark elf. The hammer cut through the air so swiftly that most would never have seen it coming, until sparks erupted where Damien's cursed blade met its head, stopping Mjolnir cold in mid-flight. Malekith pivoted, lips curling into a sneer as he faced the young god. "Thor, grandson of Bor," he snarled, "your strength is impressive, but it pales beside the power of the ether." With a contemptuous laugh, he turned away, the air around him humming with dark energy. Chapter 274. Feelings Are a Weakness. Thor barely registered the warning before the cursed warrior closed the distance in a single bound. There were no elaborate feints, just one brutal punch that sent Thor stumbling backward. But Thor was not one to surrender at the first blow. Recognizing that mere physical force could not fell his foe, he called upon the fury of the storm. With a mighty cry, he summoned Mjolnir and raised it high. In the next instant, a blinding bolt of lightning ripped through the sky, illuminating all of Asgard and crashing down upon the cursed warrior. Still, the strike was absorbed without a hint of falter from his adversary. Meanwhile, Thor knew Malekith was bound for Jane, and he felt no real fear for her safety. Bruce Banner was already standing guard. Though Banner's transformation into the Hulk had once been his greatest curse, he had finally mastered that power, forging a perfect union of Stark genius and unstoppable might. With Tony Stark's newly installed JARVIS overseeing their defenses, Thor was certain Jane was out of harm's way. His only remaining task was clear: defeat the cursed warrior and end this threat once and for all. When I seize the power of the ether, everything will sink back into darkness. Malekith's voice rang out over the roaring sky. Though he felt a flicker of unease at the thunder's raw intensity, his face betrayed no fear. With a casual gesture, he hoisted his starship aloft and hurtled straight toward the storm's vortex. Standing before him, Thor, god of thunder, let loose a barrage of crackling lightning. Yet Malekith's champion Damien did not flinch. He knew he could never outrun the thunderbolts, so he pressed on instead, each step resolute. Thor summoned a colossal bolt that shattered the earth where Damien had stood, sending up a plume of smoke and stone. When the dust settled, Damien remained unscathed, his dark armor gleaming amid the ruins. Thor scowled, Mjolnir humming in his hand. "Is that all you've got?" he growled. With a mighty swing, he unleashed another torrent of divine energy. But again, Damien waded through the storm as if it were a summer breeze. "Tell me, Malekith," Thor called out, voice booming, "what kind of defense makes your champion immune to lightning?" He slammed his hammer against his palm, thus summoning the storm's full fury. "Very well. If brute force won't do the job, I'll have to claim the ether myself." Damien staggered under another brutal blow. Without his father Odin's direct intervention, he stood no chance of slaying the cursed warrior. His hammer, Mjolnir, passed right through the foe's cursed form, and in raw physical strength, he was hopelessly outmatched. All he could do was absorb the punishment, praying that either his father or Tony Stark would arrive in time. The cursed warrior loomed over him, blade raised, ready to carve Damien open and end his life in gruesome fashion. But then, suddenly, Damien sensed a terrifying presence bearing down on them. The warrior froze, his head snapping around as though he'd seen a ghost. Panting, Damien spat blood from the corner of his mouth and took advantage of the pause to roll aside and draw in a ragged breath. He didn't know what had stopped his attacker, but he needed every second he could get. At that very moment, high atop the Rainbow Bridge, Malekith and Heimdall both stiffened, their eyes widening. Nearby, the All-Father Odin, accompanied by Queen Frigga, felt it too. Odin had first encountered this same presence years ago, but never learned its source. Now, as the sensation flared again, a flicker of fear crossed his face. He recognized this gaze. It belonged to Kassadin, the enigmatic god of the void. "Is something wrong, my love?" Queen Frigga's voice, usually soft and comforting, dropped to a whisper as she turned to face her husband, concern darkening her eyes. "Kassadin is looking at Asgard," Odin's brow furrowed. "Kassadin, the void god. Why would he set his sights on us?" Frigga pressed her lips together, troubled. "Thor brought back 2 friends from Onne, of his journeys. Nothing to do with the void cult, but I can't fathom why Kassadin would be interested in them, or in Asgard." Odin drew a steadying breath. He knew all too well how far more perilous Kassadin was than Malekith. If the void god struck at Asgard, Odin would need every ounce of power to protect his realm. Yet if he unleashed his full might now, while still fending off Malekith's invasion, he risked losing control of the volatile energies within him. Should that happen, Asgard would be swallowed whole. "We must contain our strength until the right moment," Odin decided, voice low but resolute. "Let Kassadin reveal his hand first." Below, on the Rainbow Bridge, Heimdall stood sentinel against a swarm of dark elves. Their blades rang against his, sparks dancing across the bridge's radiant arches. Then, mid-strike, Heimdall froze, his keen sight catching a presence no one else had noticed. He cocked his head, eyes narrowing, as the shadow of a far greater threat drifted across the cosmic expanse. Chapter Text: Asgard Under Siege. The Dark Elves, unseen by Heimdall's vigilant all-seeing eyes, unleashed crackling surges of black energy that struck Asgard's defenders like poisoned spears. One moment, the warriors stood firm. The next, they crumpled, their bodies frozen as if carved from ice. Heimdall's golden gaze flared with rage. For a guardian as mighty as he, only an adversary of equal power or a legendary relic could breach his defenses. Yet this assault bypassed him entirely, cutting down his brethren. With a roar that shook the walls of Valhalla, Heimdall charged forward, swinging his colossal sword in a sweeping arc. The Dark Elves barely had time to raise their shields before they were cleaved in two, their bodies shattering like obsidian glass. Even as Heimdall fought, another figure appeared on the battlefield, a young warrior in steel-gray armor, eyes glinting with fierce determination. He moved with practiced grace, stepping beside the All-Father's watchman. "Stand aside," the newcomer said, voice calm but unwavering. He lifted a greatsword that hummed with latent energy. In a single fluid motion, he hurled himself into a charging pack of dark elves, his blade tracing arcs of brilliant light. Limbs and armor flew as the intruders fell before him. Heimdall halted mid-swing and studied the warrior. "Your skill is remarkable," he rumbled. "Who are you?" The young man sheathed his sword, offering a curt nod. "I'm Damien. I've come to protect Asgard." A tremor of dark energy rippled through the air, and Malekith the Accursed strode onto the ruined courtyard. His gore-red cloak seemed to feed on the chaos of the battlefield as he searched for his true quarry, Jane Foster. Instead, he found a scene of carnage and two warriors standing unbowed at its heart. His eyes fell on Damien. The Accursed King's lips curved into a predator's smile. "Who is this?" he hissed. Malekith had studied the prophecies concerning Odin, Bor's grandson and Asgard's destined greatest champion. Odin's power would dwarf that of any god, yet the All-Father's wrath was tempered by caution. He would never unleash such might unless all else had failed. Malekith had counted on this restraint. But this young warrior fought with both unbridled ferocity and disciplined control, an impossible combination that rivaled the might of Odin himself. Worse, no skald songs or ancient records bore his name. "A mystery," Malekith mused, raising his ebony scepter. "Runes of crackling darkness danced along its length, one I intend to unravel." He fixed Damien with a glare that promised oblivion. "Stand aside, mortal, or taste the vengeance of the Dark Elf King." Damien squared his shoulders, steel in his gaze. "You'll have to go through me first." Heimdall stepped up beside him, blade already humming. Dark clouds churned overhead as thunder rumbled, omens of war. Together, the two warriors braced themselves, ready to face Malekith and his dark legions. The fate of Asgard trembled in the balance. Damien watched grimly as Ekith's face darkened. "No matter what, no one can wield the Aether's power," the Dark Elf snarled. The enemy fighters were closing fast. There was no time to retreat. If they wanted to keep the Aether, they had to strike now. Malekith pushed the throttle forward. The ship's engines roared as they dove straight for the ancient temple below. But out of nowhere, a towering green figure materialized in their path. With a single, earth-shaking punch, the Hulk rammed his fist into the hull. The impact sounded like a cannon blast. The metal groaned and buckled under the force, and the craft spun off like a wounded meteor, plummeting toward the rocky ground. Damien braced for the crash, then a streak of violet fire tore across the sky. In an instant, Iron Man descended in a blaze of purple flames. His armor shone like polished steel, arcs of energy crackling around him. He slammed into the ship from below, ripping through the hull in a spray of metal fragments. Malekith barely had time to register what happened before a mechanical arm, shaped like a massive shackle, snapped around his throat. He was thrown forward, torn halfway out of the cockpit. Sharpened metal debris shredded his tunic and scored deep, burning gashes across his chest. Hovering overhead, Tony Stark steadied himself. With one repulsor-equipped hand, he gripped Malekith by the collar. With the other, he raised his palm toward the damaged ship. A beam of violet energy lasered through the air, slicing straight into the fuselage and sending sparks flying in every direction. Damien bit back a gasp. In that instant, it was clear. The Aether was lost to them. If it hadn't already been torn away in the chaos of Hulk's punch and Iron Man's assault, it soon would be. With a thunderous boom, the alien spacecraft shattered before it even touched the ground. Damien's raw power was undeniable, but unleashing it without destroying everything in the vicinity proved impossible. The explosion ripped through nearby buildings, sending Asgardian soldiers and civilians sprawling. They'd come to help, not to wreak havoc, so Tony moved in at once to contain the carnage. "Your strength is much weaker than I expected," Tony called out, prying a mangled steel girder off a trapped guard. "Can someone with this kind of power really claim the title Lord of the Dark World?" Damien rumbled, tightening his grip on their bound captive Malekith. Tony circled the prone Dark Elf. Judging by your realm, it seems you've got competition in the fragility department. Malekith's eyes flared with contempt. He tried to thrust his hands into Damien's hold, but Damien's fingers flexed like iron bands. Struggling only slowed him down. Tony lifted his armored leg and snapped it forward. The metalled boot slammed into Malekith's ribs with bone-crushing force. Against someone of Damien's nearly unstoppable mass, it would have registered as a harsh sting. Against Malekith's living flesh, it was catastrophic: cracked ribs, ruptured organs, blood spewing from his mouth. The dark elf collapsed, wheezing. Tony stood over him, voice cold and steady. We came to protect people, not to level cities. Lesson 1. Never underestimate the Avengers. Malekith coughed up a sputter of blood. Before it could reach Tony Stark, a ripple of void energy flared from the armored hero's gauntlet, reducing the crimson droplets to curling white smoke. Stark brushed the vapor aside as Malekith hurtled through the air like a wounded meteor, straight toward Bruce Banner. Banner's expression was calm, almost detached, as he stepped forward. In one swift motion, his massive green hand shot out and clamped around Malekith's skull, pinning him in place. Banner's lips parted in a feral grin, rows of ivory teeth gleaming. "Thought you'd slipped away," he rumbled. "I was ready to find you, but you came to me first." Malekith's dark eyes fluttered open. He coughed again, and fresh blood traced a line down his chin. Every breath sent a wince of agony through him. "I only retreated to buy time," he managed, voice hoarse. "See. I meant to visit you, Stark, though I didn't expect you to track me down." Banner tightened his grip. "You led the Dark Elves in slaughtering Asgard's people. You don't get a second chance." Jane Foster stood nearby, frozen in place. She had seen both Stark and Banner push beyond human limits before, but never with such unrestrained ferocity. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized just how far these two men were willing to go. Through the haze of pain, Malekith's gaze shifted to Jane. He coughed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth, and leveled a desperate stare on her. "You kill me," he rasped, "and she dies with me." The words hung in the air, a dark promise neither Stark nor Banner cared to acknowledge. Malekith's abdomen was already gashed by jagged metal when they dragged him from the wrecked ship. Now Tony Stark's boot had opened the wound again, leaving the Dark Elf Lord on the brink of death. Magic was Malekith's true weapon. Brute strength was never his strong suit, and stripped of the Ether's power, he was helpless against them. Yet the moment his bleary eyes fell on Jane Foster, a spark of hope ignited within him. "That woman," he rasped. Banner cocked his head, following Malekith's gaze. "Jane?" He hesitated, then asked, "Does the Ether's power make you feel unwell? Weak?" Tony stepped forward, his eyes sharp behind the helmet's visor. "Are you fatigued? Drowsy? Incapable of mounting a defense?" Jane exchanged glances with the others, then nodded. "I do feel tired, and it's like I can't take the initiative to attack." Malekith let out a cruel, rasping laugh. "If you let it, the ether would erupt, an automatic defense. You'd survive whatever they could throw at you." Jane drew a steadying breath. "Okay," she said, meeting Tony's gaze. "Here's exactly what's happening to me." "The ether's power is far more than her mortal body can withstand," Malekith said coolly, stepping back to observe Jane Foster's labored breathing. "It's already coursing through her veins, sapping her life with every beat of her heart. If we don't extract it soon, she'll die." Bruce Banner frowned. "What's our move?" Tony Stark glanced between Banner and Malekith. "Hold off on killing him," he instructed. He turned to Jane. "Jane, have you tried any other method to remove the ether's energy? Did Odin himself lend you a hand?" Jane blinked against the pain, her voice strained. "I've exhausted every technique I know. Odin, Thor's father, he's never dealt with the ether before. He can't help me draw it out." Tony's jaw tightened as Jane sank back against the table, pale and trembling. They all knew time was running out, and that Malekith was waiting for the slightest opening. "If you want to master the ether's power, you must embrace dark magic," Malekith gasped, his voice barely more than a rasp. "Even Odin, son of Bor, though he is a god, commands only divine power. He cannot touch the ether." He turned his hollow gaze toward Jane, unconscious and pale on the ground beside him. "If you don't want her to die, we can make a deal," he continued, struggling to sit up. "I will help you absorb her etheric energy. That will save her life, on one condition: you let me go." Bruce Banner knelt before the fallen dark elf, his expression grave. "You have precious little time," he said. Tony Stark propped himself against a nearby wall, arms crossed. "Seems like a scam. He's too weak to put up a fight if we decide to end him here and now." Banner weighed the words for a moment. "Jane's life is more important than vengeance," he said quietly. "Let's hear him out." Tony frowned, clearly conflicted. Jane Foster was Saul's beloved. Banner wouldn't risk her life lightly, but treachery would not be tolerated. "All right," Tony said at last. "We'll let you try, but cross us and I'll crush you." Banner nodded, his gaze steely as he met Malekith's tired eyes. Relief flickered across the dark elf's pale features, but dread lay just beneath the surface. The Avengers prepared to forge a perilous alliance, one that might salve Jane Foster or doom them all. "As long as you let me go," Damien demanded, his voice steady despite the fear thrumming through him. Malekith inclined his head in mock courtesy, though a cruel sneer twisted his lips. Emotions, especially desperation, were the Achilles heel of mortals. This frail woman's life was all it took to coerce him into yielding his power. Without another word, Malekith stretched out a pale hand toward Jane Foster. In an instant, she was torn from the ground, suspended in midair, as her eyes rolled back into pitch-black pools. Scarlet fluid seeped from her mouth and nostrils, dripping down her chin and staining her clothes. Tony Stark stood a few paces away, every muscle taut with alarm. He monitored Jane's vital signs on his wrist console, fingers ready to fire a lethal blast at Malekith should her life force waver. As long as Jane lived, Malekith's bargain held, but if the slightest flicker of her heartbeat faltered, Tony would have no hesitation in turning his full arsenal against the Dark Elf. Above them all, Malekith's power of ether crackled like living lightning, hungry for the final ingredient to complete its transformation, and Damien's fate hung in the balance. Chapter 275, Malekith's Demise. All the ether's power was sucked out of the portal, condensing into a swirling dark crimson cloud that glowed like hot embers. Tony and Banner exchanged tense glances. Something was very wrong. The moment Jane collapsed, Banner's instincts kicked in. He caught her mid-fall, lowering her gently to the ground. "Her vitals are steady," Banner said, pressing a finger to Jane's neck. He paused, listening. "She's breathing." Tony exhaled in relief. Thank goodness. But their respite was short-lived. The crimson cloud suddenly surged toward Malekith, flowing into his body as if drawn by a force beyond comprehension. Reacting on instinct, Tony thrust his repulsors forward. A brilliant purple beam lanced through Malekith's chest, tearing through flesh and bone, an attack that should have been fatal. Yet the ether's power only intensified. Malekith let out a savage laugh as he rose unsteadily to his feet. The mortal wounds across his torso stitched themselves closed in an instant, flesh knitting back together as though the injuries had never happened. "Ha! Pathetic," Malekith jeered, his voice echoing with cruel triumph. He flexed his restored limbs. "Did you really think you could kill me now? You can't fathom the true might of the ether." Tony's jaw tightened, but he showed no fear, only grim resolve. "We'll see about that." Damien watched with keen interest as Malekith's wounds knit themselves closed, and the dark energy of the ether surged back into him. The raw power of the etheric force was undeniably vast, but Malekith himself remained pitifully frail, bereft of any true resilience. In Damien's mind, this sinister being was nothing more than a mirror of someone he once knew. Formidable only so long as he had his armor to shield him, pathetically vulnerable the moment the plating cracked. Tony Stark, never one to miss a cue for irony, smirked. "You know," he said, circling Malekith with a casual confidence, "for all its mystical glory, ether power still obeys the laws of physics. Maybe we should just ignore all physical phenomena and see how that works out." Bruce Banner leaned in, curiosity lighting his eyes. "Tell me, Damien, Tony, what makes you two expert commentators on etheric energies? Last I checked, neither of you were mystic scholars." A flicker of rage crossed Malekith's features. He spun to face them, his fingers crackling with violent arcs of thunder-laced ether. "You insolent fools," he hissed. With a guttural roar, he unleashed a barrage of jagged energy bolts aimed squarely at Tony Stark. But as the first bolt streaked toward him, Damien's specially reinforced steel armor vanished, retracting so swiftly that even Malekith's keen senses couldn't track it. In the split-second confusion, Malekith paused, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. Had the ether somehow failed him? Or was this merely another trick from the armored duo standing defiantly before him? Either way, for the first time since he'd regained consciousness, Malekith found himself on the defensive, and that realization stung far more than any arcane wound. Tony Stark appeared before Malekith in an instant, unleashing a blistering barrage of whip-like kicks that struck the dark elf with brutal precision. Before Malekith could register the pain, his bones shattered under the onslaught. A final savage blow sent him hurtling more than 10 meters across the Grand Hall, his body skidding to a stop in a twisted heap. He lay there, a broken figure on the marble floor, the agony only catching up to him seconds later. The immortal warlord, an ancient warrior who had survived countless battles, could only howl in disbelief. "Why don't you finish the job, Stark?" Bruce Banner stepped into the hall, arms folded, surveying the wreckage. He'd seen Tony in action before, and knew exactly how devastating his blows could be. "With your firepower," Banner remarked coolly, "there's no reason you couldn't tear him apart." Tony hovered in his steel armor, arms crossed as he studied the battered form of Malekith. "We still know, too, little about the ether's power," he said coolly. "We can't risk running it through our bodies for some uncontrolled experiment." He glanced back at Bruce Banner, who nodded in agreement. "What I want to find out," Tony continued, "is how long it takes for him to recover from an injury this severe." Malekith recoiled, every instinct screaming that these two were treating him like some lab rat. Banner and Stark's whispered plotting sounded more like a demon's hiss in his ears. Why did Asgardian intelligence omit mention of these mortals? Realizing escape was his only chance, Malekith summoned the ether's energy. The air rippled, reweaving flesh and bone as his shattered form knit itself back together. He stood unsteadily, gaze flicking between his would-be captors. "What's the point?" he demanded. "With wounds this catastrophic, it would take me hours to heal completely." Bruce Banner's eyes widened in disbelief. "He healed already? Does the Aether's power really override the laws of physics?" Tony Stark tightened his grip on his repulsor gauntlet. "It certainly looks that way. Let's put it to the test." Without another word, Bruce lunged at Malekith. His fist connected squarely with the Dark Elf's chest before Malekith could even rise to his feet. The impact rattled the great hall, and the stone floor cracked open in a deep chasm. Malekith staggered backward, clutching his side, then spat out a torrent of blood, laced with fragments of his own organs. In that moment, to Tony and Bruce, Malekith ceased to be a foe and became nothing more than a specimen under study. Two brilliant, if ruthless minds saw only the opportunity to uncover the secret of his regeneration. Mercy had no place alongside their insatiable hunger for answers. As they prepared for the next assault, they realized they were facing not just an enemy, but a force that defied every rule they thought they knew. Malekith's blood ran cold as he realized just how dire his situation truly was. He reached deep into the ether, willing reality itself to bend in his favor. The steel plates of his armor rippled and dissolved into soap-like bubbles. Yet no amount of sorcery could strip the hulk of his prodigious strength. Cornered and grievously wounded, Malekith wove the ether around his injuries, sealing torn flesh and staunching the bleeding. Anything to keep himself alive. He clung to a single, desperate hope. Tony Stark and Bruce Banner would need him alive if they ever hoped to unlock the secrets of the ether. Let them torture him, he thought, but they would not kill him. Once their cursed warrior had slain Bor's grandson, Thor, they would still need Malekith as a living repository of his power, and thus he would endure. That conviction barely formed in his mind before Stark's right hand morphed into a razor-shining sword. In one swift, merciless stroke, it descended through Malekith's neck. His eyes flew wide in disbelief, and an eternity of pain flared across his vision. Then everything went black. Damien watched the swirling crimson tendrils of the ether pulse in Tony's makeshift containment unit. "You wanted to study the power of the ether?" he asked. Tony nodded. "It's undeniable. This stuff seems to grant small-scale wishes, nothing omnipotent, but powerful enough to restore grievous injuries in an instant." Behind them lay the body of Malekith. With one swift motion, Tony's blade had severed the Dark Elf's head. They both watched as the last spark of life flickered out. A wish-granting force? Bruce Banner leaned forward, curiosity and concern warring in his eyes. I never imagined it could be this potent. Don't be fooled, Tony replied, rubbing his chin. It won't activate on its own. It responds to the user's intent, and there may be other capabilities we haven't uncovered, if only our current wielder weren't so inexperienced. Banner sighed. We'll need extensive testing to map out its limits, but this isn't the moment for that. He tapped his comlink. I'm going to check on Saul. Thor still hasn't checked in, and that's a bad sign. Tony cast one last glance at the fallen dark elf. Let's move. We can't afford to leave our friends in the dark. Together, Damien, Tony, and Banner departed the blood-soaked clearing, each step echoing with the promise and danger of the ether's untapped power. Once Tony finished speaking, he deactivated stealth mode. His armor could only sustain it for 5 minutes, so he had no intention of lingering with Malekith. A few rapid experiments would be enough to generate some initial hypotheses, and there would be plenty of time for deeper research later. Understood, Bruce Banner replied, nodding. Without Jane Foster by his side this time, he didn't have to hold back for fear of hurting her. He bent his knees, coiled his muscles, and then shot skyward like a green comet, covering nearly 1 kilometer in seconds, straight toward the shrine in the main hall. Meanwhile, Thor was in dire straits. A cursed warrior's blow had sent him crashing through a stone wall. Dazed and bleeding, he tumbled the rest of the way to the floor. With a grim effort, he clutched Mjolnir in his right hand, anchoring himself against the spinning haze in his head, and fought to stay conscious. Damien ground his teeth. It didn't matter that Tony and Banner hadn't shown up. Jane was safe under their watch, so Thor's mind could be at least partly at ease. What gnawed at him was the absence of his father. After all this time, there was still no sign of support from Odin. If help didn't arrive soon, Thor would be beaten to a pulp by this cursed warrior. This creature was a true monster, immune to thunder, unfazed by Mjolnir, and far stronger than either of them. So far, Thor had been driven back at every turn. Thor's instincts urged him to withdraw and call for reinforcements, but his status as Crown Prince forbade it. He couldn't abandon the battlefield while this abomination ran amok. Only a handful of Asgardians could stand against it, and if they let it rampage unchecked, the death toll in Asgard would be unimaginable. Damien slapped his palm against his cheek to clear his head. A god of Asgard skulking around like a frightened rodent, it disgusts me. The cursed warrior locked eyes with Thor, who swayed on his feet but refused to fall. With a roar that shook the very air, the abomination lunged once more. Chapter 15. The Cursed Duel. Malekith's orders were simple: kill Thor. Yet every time Damien struck, Thor survived. Worse than the endless clashes was the silent, malevolent presence that trailed Damien's every move, an unseen watcher whose very gaze froze his blood. No one knew its origin or intent, and that uncertainty sabotaged Damien's focus. He could never throw his full strength into the fight. Thor found himself pressed to the defensive, unable to launch more than quick, stinging counterattacks. He struck, then darted away, strike and withdraw, his hammer's thunderous echo the only warning of his return. Minutes dragged past as Malekith fumbled in his arcane chamber, attempting to seize the power of the ether. Each failing spell left Damien's side deeper in enemy territory, cut off and blind. Front, flank, rear, anywhere could spring the ambush, and no scout had returned to confirm their safety. Damien tightened his grip on the runed blade, heart pounding. He raised his voice across the shattered plain. I have time. I could dance with you for days. Thor, breath ragged and armor dented, met his challenge with a steady grin. A shame you don't have that long. On enemy soil, neither champion dared unleash their full arsenal. Caution was a fragile truce, the only barrier between a single duel and all-out war. Advancing too far into enemy territory carries its own risks. If you don't eliminate your target quickly, reinforcements will arrive and the tide will turn against you. In the end, even if you inflict grievous losses on the enemy, your own side will pay in blood. Shut up, snarled the cursed warrior. If I kill you now, we still have a chance. With a deafening roar, the cursed warrior charged Thor, closing the 100-meter distance in an instant. Their earlier clash had already reduced the ancient temple to rubble, collapsed walls, shattered pillars, debris littering every corridor. Undeterred, he plowed through whatever lay in his path, smashing stone as easily as if it were parchment. The ground trembled beneath each thunderous step. Thor steadied himself, then drew upon his old tactic. He called down a bolt of lightning and hurled Mjolnir straight at the onrushing warrior. The hammer spun through the air, crackling with raw power. But the cursed warrior merely raised a hand and swatted it aside as if it were a nuisance. Beside them, Saul, utterly spent, dragged himself out of the hammer's path, collapsing into a crouch just in time. Damien darted through the gentleman's mansion, weaving between gaping holes in the floor and piles of shattered beams. The ruined hallways served as the perfect labyrinth to slow the cursed warrior's relentless assault. Though monstrously strong, the warrior's bulk made him clumsy. As long as Damien avoided a head-on clash, keeping his enemy off balance was straightforward. But the cursed warrior was growing impatient. Every time Damien slipped into a blind corner, every feint and backtrack, his fury mounted. His eyes flared an angry crimson, and with a roar that shook the broken walls, he barreled forward on pure instinct. By the time the warrior smashed through the barricade, Damien was already bracing himself in a guarded stance. He couldn't hope to land a killing blow, so he'd settled instead for survival. The cursed warrior hesitated only an instant. Then, shifting his raised fist into an open palm, he lunged to cradle Damien's head between his massive fingers, intent not on a quick, brutish punch, but on trapping him, squeezing the life out of him at leisure. Damien's breath caught as the giant's hand closed in. He leaned back, muscles tensed, but the momentum was too great, the distance far too short. With no room to retreat, he found himself staring straight at the cavernous maw of that monstrous palm, helpless, vulnerable, and moments from being crushed. With a deafening boom, the ceiling above shattered as if struck by some invisible hammer. A massive shape hurtled through the gap, and Damien, the cursed warrior, came crashing down, landing hard on the cold stone floor. 10,000 a day, the first 4,000-word update, is now available. Chapter 276, The Dark Elves' Downfall. The air was thick with dust. Through the swirling haze, Thor spotted a massive form and forced himself to his feet. Grabbing the cursed warrior, he hurled it aside like a thunderous projectile. The fallen foe shot through a ring of craggy boulders, each impact echoing like cannon fire, shaking the great hall and sending motes of debris cascading from the vaulted ceiling. When the dust finally settled, Bruce Banner's unmistakable broad green back emerged before him. "Thor, you all right?" Banner called, turning around. He took in the blood at the corner of Thor's mouth and the dark purple bruises marring his cheek. "I'm okay," Thor replied with a relieved grin. "But you showed up a bit late." Banner's eyes flickered with concern. "Tony noticed you'd been gone too long and figured you might be in trouble, so I came to check on you." Thor winced as he rubbed a stiff shoulder. "Sorry, we thought you could handle things here. It took us a while to bring down Malekith." Banner's expression softened, though a hint of embarrassment colored his features. "Glad you're safe." He paused, scanning the shattered rubble around them. "Let's make sure no one else is lurking in the shadows." Together, the two heroes prepared to move deeper into the hall, their battered forms resolute against whatever threats still remained. "Malekith is dead?" Thor's voice cracked as he stared in disbelief. "We bought ourselves the time we needed," the armored hero replied, sheathing his blade. "By defeating Malekith, we freed Jane Foster from his possession." Thor shook his head, relief flooding his features. "Is Jane all right?" "She's safe now," the hero assured him. "I'll fill you in on the details later. Right now, let's finish this." From the shadows, Bruce Banner stepped forward. His tone was measured, but his eyes burned with determination. "That creature's strength is off the charts. Be careful." Thor gave a curt nod. "Understood. Thanks for the warning." A slow, confident grin split Banner's face. "I just wish more opponents had given me a fair shot." In the next heartbeat, he transformed into the Hulk and surged toward the cursed warrior. The dark behemoth rose into view, its armor scarred and pulsating with malevolent energy. Hulk's fist rocketed forward, and the warrior met the blow with a savage backhand. The collision of titanic forces rippled through the air, sending shockwaves across the ruined courtyard. Thor raised Mjolnir and readied himself. Bring it on. Together, Thunder God and Green Giant braced for the fight of their lives. The shattered stones skittered aside, carving out a circular pit at their feet. Thor's eyes went wide as he took in the raw power surging through Damien. He hadn't expected this level of strength. At last, a challenger worthy of my might, Thor boomed, raising Mjolnir. Damien cracked a fierce grin. He watched the cursed warrior absorb his punch squarely on the jaw, barely budging, only stepping back a few feet, exhilarated. Before the beast could even blink, Damien's left fist came crashing down like a battering ram. The warrior threw up both forearms to block, but the force was cataclysmic. Bones rattled inside the creature's frame. Its eyes shrank in sudden alarm. As the cursed warrior teetered, Damien shifted his weight and drove his heel down onto the monster's feet. The impact jolted the warrior's ankles and pinned him to the ground. Damien fought on pure instinct rather than fancy technique, and once again, brute strength proved more than enough. Even though the Hulk has only ever fought with his fists, even a single blow from him can drive an opponent to despair. And that's still only a fraction of his true power. Now that Banner has learned to master the Hulk's strength, the Emerald Champion no longer needs to rely on swinging arms and legs alone. A single thunderous step is enough to shake the entire shrine and to crush the cursed warrior's foot to splinters. Banner's raw power is now something almost no one can match. Even Tony Stark must pull out his hidden trump cards just to gain a foothold, and that still only lets him stave off defeat for a moment. This doesn't make Banner weak. It means that against any other adversary, the Hulk becomes an almost supernatural force, a rampaging colossus with few weaknesses. The cursed warrior groans, agony lancing through his shattered left foot. He realizes he's come up against a foe whose physical might rivals his own. But with the only means of escape gone, there's nothing left but one desperate option: kill the Hulk now, or die trying. "I'll end you," he bellows, gathering what strength he has left, and lunges into another frantic attack. When the cursed warrior's punch finally found its mark on Damien's jaw, it only snapped his head to the side. He spat out 2 teeth, but where most men would have gone down, Damien only grinned, blood trickling from his split lip. Exhilaration coursed through him at the sight. His opponent's powerful blow hadn't even slowed him. Yet Damien refused to simply soak up damage. He sprang forward, planting both palms against the warrior's temples. Sometimes an open-handed strike is more devastating than a fist, a fact the cursed warrior discovered the moment Damien's blows rattled his skull. Ghostly flickers danced behind the warrior's eyes. His knees buckled as pain exploded through his head. Before the warrior could recover, Damien yanked at his feet and hoisted him off the ground. Then, with the relentlessness of a sledgehammer, he brought the warrior crashing down onto the packed earth again and again. Each impact sent cracks radiating out from the pit that blossomed beneath them. The ground trembled, dust and grit sprayed into the air. Blood spurted from the warrior's mouth as he lay sprawled, body convulsing under Damien's onslaught. His vision darkened, consciousness wavering. Around them, the forest held its breath, watching as one savage tide of fury met another, and only one would rise when the dust settled. In just over 10 seconds, Banner turned Damien into a blunt instrument and ended the cursed warrior's life. Damien's massive form crumpled to the floor without a sound, and the force of that final blow was enough to finish off the battle-shaken shrine. Cracks raced along its walls, and stones began to tumble. Banner's victory froze him in place. He stared, stunned, as the ancient Asgardian temple threatened to collapse. Thor, who'd watched in awe as Banner unleashed that devastating punch, spotted the crumbling structure and snapped out, "What are you doing standing there? The whole place is coming down. Move!" The shout jolted Banner back to his senses. He scooped up Damien's body and sprinted for the exit. Behind them, the palace that had stood for countless ages shuddered and gave way in a thunderous cascade of debris. Panting at the edge of the wreckage, Banner finally let his guard down. He looked back at the ruin, and shame washing over his face, murmured, "Sorry, I really screwed this up." He had meant to help, but in the end, he destroyed Asgard's treasured shrine. Hulk's power is enormous, and if he's not careful, the surrounding area can suffer serious damage. "Don't worry," Tony assured him. "You didn't mess up. You did us a huge favor by taking down the cursed warrior." "Tony's right," Thor agreed. Asgard was invaded by the Dark Elves. Some casualties and destruction were unavoidable. But what truly matters is that we've stopped Malekith's plan. Thanks to you, we've won this battle." Banner looked down in shame, but Thor reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Though the king's eyes still held a trace of regret, his smile was warm and encouraging. The ancient shrine, at least 1,500 years old, had collapsed in the fighting. Its loss weighed heavily on every Asgardian heart. Yet Thor knew that as long as their people were safe, they could rebuild the palace and restore their home. With Malekith dead and his greatest weapon, the cursed warrior, destroyed, the dark elf army lay in ruin. Hearing Thor's words, Banner felt his spirits lift. The battle had been won, and now Asgard's future could begin anew. Damien watched from the sidelines, eager to help, but aware of how overwhelming Hulk's power could be. If he was going to contribute meaningfully, he'd need to push himself even harder. Bruce, calm, focused, despite the beast within, turned to him. "Let's find Tony and see what's happening." Thor caught the relief in Bruce's eyes and offered a broad smile. "We'll stay here in Asgard and handle the shrine's construction and everything else." Bruce nodded gratefully. With Damien at his side, he strode toward Thor's hall. A few moments later, they returned to their quarters, where Tony sat tinkering with a deep red gem that gleamed like polished onyx. "Tony," Bruce asked, scanning the room anxiously, "what happened to the ether's energy?" "It's missing." Tony held the ruby aloft between thumb and forefinger, letting its facets catch the torchlight. "It's all here now," he said. "After Malekith fell, the residual ether in his body condensed into this gem." Bruce's brow furrowed. "But the ether is supposed to be erratic, unstable energy." "Exactly," Tony agreed. "Which makes this so strange. Somehow the ether fused into this ruby and stabilized completely." He gave Damien and Bruce a knowing look, then with a flick of his wrist, sent the gem sailing through the air. Damien watched it spin, glowing softly, until Bruce caught it effortlessly in his palm, already turning it over to admire its inner light. Damien held the gem up to the light, studying the swirling glow within. The ether's energy moved in tight, organized currents rather than bleeding out chaotically. He looked from the gem to Bruce Banner. "If it stays contained like this, can we still run tests on it without danger?" Tony Stark folded his arms. "Malekith told us we'd need sorcery to control the ether. Nobody here practices magic. How do we handle it?" Bruce glanced at the gem, then tapped his tablet. "I've already asked Jarvis to run a full analysis. True, raw ether is wildly unstable and requires a special energy signature to activate, what Malekith calls witchcraft. But now that this fragment is condensed and its power has settled, it's far easier to contain and study with our tech." Tony gave a satisfied nod. Bruce let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then he added, "There's only one catch. This gem is an Asgardian relic. We can't just keep it." He turned to Thor. "We need to return it to you first. Then, once you're done, we'd like your permission to borrow it for our research." Thor raised an eyebrow. "I plan to use the cosmic cube to rebuild the Bifrost Bridge immediately. I'll need this gem back as soon as possible." Tony pinched the bridge of his nose with a mock groan. "All right, fine. When you're finished creating a rainbow highway to Asgard, give us a shout. We'll be ready." Despite the disappointment, he couldn't hide the spark of excitement in his eyes. This ether sample promised breakthroughs like no other. Bruce Banner and Tony Stark had both witnessed the phenomenal power of the ether. They knew that if even a fraction of that energy could be safely harnessed, it would usher in technological breakthroughs no one else could replicate. Thor, having just returned to his hall and greeted Jane Foster, listened quietly as they spoke. At last he took her hand in his. "Jane, you've done Asgard a great service. I should have agreed to lend you the ether immediately. We are friends, after all. But I am not yet king. My father still reigns. Strictly speaking, the ether is a treasure from my grandfather Bor's generation. It must be treated with the utmost care. I need to consult my father before I can give you a final answer." He released Jane's hand and turned to Banner and Stark. He understood their eagerness. This was power mortals could scarcely imagine. But the responsibility of it lay beyond his sole authority. "I hope you understand." Tony's eyes lit up. "Of course, Your Highness. Banner, would you mind returning the stone for now?" Bruce Banner stepped forward and placed the shimmering gem back into Thor's waiting palm. The Prince of Asgard cradled it gently, its iridescent glow reflecting in his thoughtful eyes. "Thank you," Tony said, managing a hopeful grin. "Please let us know your father's decision as soon as you can." With a final nod, Thor tucked the ether safely away. As the group dispersed, each one carried the same mix of excitement and apprehension over what wonders and dangers the ether's power might yet reveal. Damien stepped back and bowed his head slightly, the ether gem glowing faintly in his hand. He'd been itching to dive right into his research. After all, the ether's limitless power could conjure up any environment or device he needed, erasing nearly every barrier in their work. But this was Asgard's greatest treasure, not his to take. With a firm breath, he returned it to Thor. "You've done Asgard a tremendous service," Damien said. "We'll discuss this thoroughly and give you our decision as soon as we can." Thor accepted the gem, his blue eyes locking onto Damien's with unspoken understanding. He then turned to Tony, offering him the same steady look. "There's no need for pressure," he said calmly. "Whatever you decide won't change our bond." He held the gem close for a moment before continuing. "We do wish to study the ether, but we know the responsibility that comes with it. Our mission here wasn't to seize its power for ourselves. Above all, we want to help Asgard through this crisis, and, in doing so, aid the Blue Star as well." Tony nodded, meeting Thor's sincerity with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Thor," he replied. Thor returned the gesture, hope glinting in his expression as the three friends stood together, united by trust rather than ambition. Meanwhile, with the cursed warrior and Malekith both fallen, the Dark Elves found themselves leaderless and without orders to withdraw. Surrounded by troops under Loki and Sif, they were swiftly routed, every last one cut down, and the battle was decisively won. From the ramparts of his shattered palace, All-Father Odin watched the dust settle over the battlefield. When he sensed Kassadin's attention finally shift away from Asgard, a weight lifted from his shoulders. It appeared Kassadin would now turn elsewhere, perhaps testing Tony Stark's ability to contain the threat. Odin longed to thank Stark in person for his aid, but the war's end brought too much grief. Countless Asgardians lay injured or mourning loved ones. His first duty was to comfort his people. Reluctantly, he commanded a raven to fly to Thor, instructing him to welcome both Tony Stark and Bruce Banner into his halls. At the very least, they would remain for the post-battle feast, an evening to honor those who had sacrificed everything and to celebrate Asgard's hard-won peace. Chapter 277. When Damien saw Banner strike down the cursed warrior and watched the ethereal power collapse into the reality stone, he knew the battle was over. Thor lay battered and spent. He'd fought bravely but was far from his full strength. Malekith had forged the cursed warrior expressly to challenge both Odin and his son. Had the destroyer remained on the field, the fight might have raged all the way to Asgard's gates. And if Malekith didn't beat a hasty retreat, the destroyer's arrival would doom the Dark Elves to utter annihilation. By protocol, the genuine Infinity Stones should now be delivered to the collectors. But under these circumstances, there was every likelihood that the Reality Stone would stay behind, entrusted to Tony Stark and Bruce Banner for further study. In practical terms, having it in their hands was no different from it being in Damien's. Among the 6 Infinity Stones, the Reality Stone isn't famed for raw destructive force. Its true strength lies in reshaping matter and perception, making it less a weapon of mass devastation and more a subtler, defensive asset, capable of bending reality to one's will rather than simply obliterating foes. Damien studied the Reality Stone with wary fascination. On its own, the gem could twist fragments of reality, but only when all 6 Infinity Stones work in concert does its full, terrifying power emerge. United, their reach would expand from a local battlefield to the furthest corners of the universe, granting the wielder the ability to reshape existence with a single snap of the fingers. Tony's theory had been right. A lone Reality Stone is limited by the user's own will, able to fulfill only certain desires, not grant boundless wishes. Yet even that partial power is astonishing and deadly. If Malekith were stronger, any warrior capable of facing Tony and Banner, armed with the Reality Stone, could cut them down without mercy. From Damien's point of view, the cursed warrior, Malekith's lieutenant, would actually wield the stone more effectively, thanks to his superior strength. But Dark Elf law is absolute. As their king, Malekith claims the Ether's power by right of command. In appointing himself its master, Malekith dooms himself to the very failure he most fears. Once the Reality Stone appeared, Damien knew the Power Stone wouldn't be far behind. On the Blue Star, the Infinity Gems are guarded either by Odin or by the Ancient One. Stealing one outright would be no simple feat, but when the Power Stone made its way to Earth, it would practically be delivered into Damien's hands, and he had every intention of seizing it. Having savored the unfolding spectacle, Damien tore his gaze from the skies above Asgard. He found the Allfather's fear of an assault on his realm almost laughable, overly cautious, and born of a secret none of the other players in this cosmic game suspected. Odin was dying. Only Damien knew that the king of Asgard hovered at the brink of mortality. Oddly enough, Thor's mother, Frigga, had survived this time. Her life spared, Odin's grief hadn't blinded him with rage, nor had his power flared out of control and burned him out prematurely. If anything, Frigga's presence might even eke out a few more years of life for the Allfather. But Damien understood the hard truth. Asgardians age, however slowly, and unless Odin submitted himself to the void, he would inevitably succumb to time within the next decade. When that day came, when Odin teetered on the edge of life and death, Damien might find an opening to sway the Allfather to his cause. Yet whether to offer alliance or to strike outright was a choice that demanded the utmost caution. Chapter revision. Because as long as Odin lives and channels his essence into the void, the Asgardian faction that emerges will only grow more powerful. Even now, several years after Damien acquired the Power Stone, he remained convinced that he could seize Asgard by force. Yet raw strength alone would not suffice. Groveling before Odin served no purpose if the Allfather merely absorbed void energy for himself, risking even greater complications down the road. Damien needed a subtler approach. Compared to Odin's stubborn majesty, Thor was far easier to influence. First, he would observe how Odin responded to the idea of void worship. By quietly encouraging Asgard's people to embrace the void, he could spread the cult's doctrine without demanding Odin's immediate loyalty. After all, converting Asgard's populace was no different from converting any other realm. It was simply more challenging because of Asgard's sheer power and numbers. To gain Odin's allegiance, Damien reasoned, he must prevent the Allfather from acting autonomously and undermining the order of the void faith. Subtle manipulation, rather than open confrontation, would keep Odin in check. Damien slipped a glance towards Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter as they wandered hand in hand through a European garden on their honeymoon. In a few days, Hydra's liquidation plan would go into effect. He wondered whether Nick Fury would manage to contact Steve in time to see it through. Damien studied the board with keen interest for a moment, then shifted his focus back to the match at hand. He sat forward, fingers steepled, waiting patiently for his opponent's next move. The war had ended, and Asgard was settling into a cautious peace. Tony Stark and Bruce Banner had been invited to remain on Asgard for a while, to honor the fallen, share in the celebration, and lend their expertise if needed. Their first duty was a grand memorial service. The great halls were draped in white and silver, banners fluttering overhead as warriors, citizens, and gods alike came to pay their respects. Mournful horns sounded across the realm as names of the dead were read aloud, and every Asgardian heart felt the weight of the losses. That somber ceremony gave way to a feast unlike any seen before in the Nine Realms. Long tables groaned under platters of roasted boar, platters of honey-glazed fruits, and shining flagons of mead. Music swelled in the vaulted ceilings, and laughter rang out as survivors and guests alike reveled in their hard-won victory. Despite the joy that flickered in every corner of the hall, the cost had been high. Asgard's armies had paid dearly to ensure the Dark Elves, their ancient and merciless enemies, were driven from existence forever. The knowledge that no shadow of those dark foes would ever threaten Asgard again was a balm to countless wounds. Amid the splendor, Asgard's sons and daughters, tall, golden-haired, and draped in finery, flirted and conversed in hushed tones. Yet Tony Stark and Bruce Banner lingered apart, exchanging wry smiles. Both knew that entangling themselves with Asgardian nobility could lead to tangled allegiances and courtly headaches. Better to wait until they returned to Earth before pursuing any romantic intrigues. So instead, the two Earth heroes did the one thing they did best. They ate. Heaping servings of every delicacy found their way onto Stark and Banner's plates. On Blue Star, Earth, their normal routine might include 5 modest meals a day, but tonight they indulged without restraint, savoring each bite as though it were their last. And somewhere in the back of their minds, they both agreed. When the mead flowed this freely, it was unwise, and frankly impossible, to think about anything but the next course. Life in Asgard offers no all-you-can-eat buffets, only 3 modest meals a day. That means you're hungry 2 out of every 3. If it weren't for Soul's kindness, Bruce Banner and Tony Stark would have begged him to send them back to Blue Star for a proper feast. Still, they knew there was no turning down Thor's invitation now, so they endured the rumbling in their stomachs. When mealtime finally arrived, Tony and Bruce piled their plates high, eating as though they hadn't had a bite in days. Their hearty appetites drew a few curious glances from the other guests, but there was no judgment, only admiration. Everyone whispered that these two were the very heroes Thor had specifically summoned. During the last great battle, they had fought with unflinching courage. Tony and Bruce together had cornered and slain Malekith after a fierce struggle, and Bruce had joined Thor in vanquishing the cursed warriors. Their deeds, it was said, had tipped the tide of war. And to top it all off, both Tony Stark and Bruce Banner looked remarkably young and handsome in Asgard's golden light. Damien's growing strength had done wonders for Asgard, and his chiseled features naturally turned heads wherever he went. Yet whenever some curious Asgardian women thought about approaching him, they found themselves too bashful, especially when they saw Tony Stark and Bruce Banner hard at work nearby. Ironically, if Tony or Bruce had known these ladies wanted to say hello, they'd have sent them packing. Neither man was eager to get entangled with Asgardian maidens. Chapter note: this is the 3rd update, totaling 2,000 words. All 10,000 words of the chapter are now available. Please vote and subscribe. Chapter 278, Odin's Dilemma. Deep within the halls of Asgard, in the private chamber of the Allfather, Odin paced before the flickering hearth. Thor stood at attention. "Father," Thor began, "Tony Stark and Bruce Banner have requested to borrow the power of the ether." Odin paused, voice measured. "And what reason do they give?" "They're both scientists," Thor explained. "They witnessed the ether's magical properties and wish to study it. They've promised that if you deem it too dangerous, they won't press you for it." Odin closed his eyes, weighing his son's words. Tony Stark, known to some as Kassadin, the god of the void, was no ordinary mortal. To lend the ether to Stark would be to hand its power over to a deity of pure emptiness. Once given, it would be all but impossible to reclaim. Should Kassadin so choose, he could seize it by force the moment the Allfather fell in battle. Thor was strong, perhaps rivaling the gods themselves, but he was still young and had yet to master the full extent of his divine heritage. In the face of the void god's cunning, Thor's defenses might be hopelessly outmatched. Odin opened his eyes, the glow of the hearth reflected there. The choice before him was clear and perilous. Reject their plea and risk offending 2 brilliant minds who had served the realms well. Grant it and invite the wrath of a void god who would brook no refusal. With a heavy breath, Odin clasped his hands behind his back. The decision would shape the fate of Asgard and perhaps the entire 9 realms. Odin paced the length of his golden hall, deep in thought. At last he spoke. "We should entrust the ether directly to Tony Stark and have him deliver it to Kassadin. That way, we secure a favor with Kassadin and send a friendly signal. Even if I fall soon and Thor faces peril, he can still call on the Voidwalker for aid." Thor furrowed his brow. "But father, if we lend it to Tony Stark, aren't we really lending it to Kassadin?" Odin paused before answering. "Do not underestimate who stands behind Tony Stark." Thor hesitated. "Are you certain, father?" Odin's voice turned grave. "The ether is no ordinary artifact. Its power rivals that of the cosmic cube itself. In the wrong hands, or used without care, it could unleash untold catastrophe." Thor looked puzzled. Loki, standing to one side, nodded in agreement. "You understand the risk we run, father," he said quietly. "This power could invite calamity if mishandled." Odin closed his eyes for a moment, weighing their words. Then he opened them with resolve. All the same, the alliance we forge with Kassadin may tip the balance of cosmic forces in our favor. We must trust that Stark and the Voidwalker will wield it wisely. Thor and Loki exchanged uneasy glances but fell silent. The fate of worlds now rested on their decision, and on the uncertain loyalty of two unlikely heroes. Odin sat upon his throne, the weight of ages in his voice. "I won't dwell on your past mischief, Loki," he said, fixing his steely gaze on his younger son. "By joining your brother to defend Asgard, you've done more than enough to atone. Yet the Aether's power is meant for Kassadin, the god of the void. Why do you still press for it?" Before Loki could answer, Thor stepped forward, concern etched in every line of his face. "Father, I must ask, did Tony Stark and Bruce Banner arrive at Kassadin's behest, hoping to claim the Aether for him?" Odin's expression hardened. "Not at all. When I sought them out, there was no trace of communication with Kassadin. They learned of Malekith's looming invasion and volunteered to help of their own free will. Tony insisted it was entirely his choice, and both Loki and I can vouch for their honesty." Thor let out a relieved breath and thumped his chest. "Then you have my full trust in them." Odin's voice rang through the hall. "All you did was give your word. Why are you mixed up in this, Thor?" Thor bristled, but before he could answer, Odin turned to Loki. "Loki, you're good at reading people. Can you stand by him too?" His eyes were sharp, but there was no real ire in them. "As much as I despise Tony Stark, I can't deny he's a man of action. He values Blue Star more than most, and he knows that any threat to Asgard would also endanger Blue Star. He'd move to protect it." Loki met his father's gaze and paused, choosing his words carefully. "I understand your concern, Father. I'm not trying to fault Thor." He glanced at his brother. "But if Kassadin truly desires the power of the Aether, then that power already resides within him. I suspect our two allies are simply eager to study him, hoping to unlock the Aether's secrets. In the end, though, it's Kassadin who holds that energy." Odin folded his arms, considering Loki's counsel. "So you believe the Aether's power is, for all intents and purposes, in Kassadin's hands?" Loki inclined his head once. "Exactly. Whoever seeks to control the Aether must reckon with him first. Do you understand?" Odin's deep voice echoed through the great hall as he turned to face Thor and Loki. Thor and Loki exchanged glances before nodding curtly. Odin paced slowly, his cloak trailing behind him. "It's no longer a question of whether I want to lend the Aether's power. It's about control. Others are already scheming to seize it, and their methods will be far less considerate than ours. By granting Tony Stark access now, we save ourselves from facing their wrath later." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Yes, the Void Cult will still regard the Asgardians with suspicion, but if Asgard ever finds itself in desperate straits, we'll have earned a favor with them, and a direct line to the God of the Void. When the time comes, we can call in that debt for help." Odin turned to his elder son. "To rule Asgard is to weigh every friendship, to anticipate every consequence. A king's choice never affects just one person. It reverberates across the entire realm." He stopped before Thor and Loki, folding his arms. "By entrusting the Aether to Tony Stark, and by Stark's decision to pass it on to Kassadin, we have fashioned more than a weapon. Think of it as an amulet. Thor, you may not feel its magic at first glance, but Loki, it will sharpen your insight when you need it most. Consider this gesture our bridge to the human world and to powers beyond our own." Chapter 7. A Lesson in Responsibility. Thor's blue eyes flickered with understanding as he absorbed his father's directive. At last, he gave a firm nod. "Very well, Father. I will lend them the power of Aether." Odin regarded his eldest son thoughtfully. "Consider it repayment for Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, who came to our aid when Asgard faced its darkest hour. But heed this. Do not give it freely. You are to loan them the Aether, not hand it over as a gift." Thor paused, mulling over the precise wording, then turned and strode away to fulfill his task. Loki, who had been on the verge of trailing after his brother, was halted by Odin's commanding tone. "Loki, stay here a moment. There's more I must tell you." The trickster prince stopped in his tracks, curiosity warring with his impatience. Odin's gaze softened as he addressed his younger son. "Your brother is strong, and he will only grow stronger. Yet strength alone does not make a ruler. Thor's greatest asset, and his greatest weakness, is his devotion to friendship. He acts on impulse when someone he cares for is in need. He rarely believes the worst will happen. His optimism is unshakable. Odin folded his arms, the golden light of the throne room dancing across his features. That combination, power tempered by compassion, defines a true king. Remember it well. I think those are the two most important points, Loki said, his green-gold eyes reflecting a fierce determination. Odin inclined his head. So, you want me to step in? Loki shifted, weighing his words. Yes, you have insights my brother lacks. Perhaps your mother and you neglected me. Though Thor and I were raised as brothers, our personalities could not be more different. Learning the truth of my birth, it made me expect the worst. But I never intended to harm Asgard. He let the confession hang in the air. All I ever wanted was to prove myself, to earn your approval and mother's. Odin's stern features softened, relief and concern flickering across his face. Loki, he said quietly, neither your mother nor I have ever disapproved of you. For a moment, father and son simply regarded each other. Loki's usual composure melted into something more vulnerable, shock, and perhaps the faintest spark of hope. Odin knew they needed a longer, honest conversation if they were to secure Asgard's future. And with that understanding passing between them, the weight of unspoken words finally began to lift. Odin regarded his two sons thoughtfully. If you can stand united, each filling the other's gaps, you'll be more than capable of protecting Asgard. Frankly, it makes no difference to me which of you wears the crown. If you, Loki, desire the throne, Thor is willing to step aside and give it to you. At the mention of this offer, Loki stiffened, shock flickering across his face. Odin's tone softened. I swear he meant it. Loki fell silent, then bowed his head in acknowledgement. No matter how many schemes he'd hatched, Thor had never held a grudge, never punished him beyond a sharp word. That enduring patience was precisely why Loki had always recognized Thor as his brother. Asgard is renowned throughout the cosmos, presiding over 9 vast realms. It wasn't only my judgment that made Thor king, but the unanimous recognition of every Asgardian and of all the peoples across the 9 realms. Without their acceptance, the title would mean nothing, no matter who wore the crown. And just because I did not ascend to the throne myself, doesn't diminish my service to Asgard. Our citizens, and all who dwell in the 9 realms, are perceptive. They see every deed regardless of who performs it. Moreover, kingship carries tremendous burdens. Ordinary folk could never share them, yet Thor cannot bear them alone. He needs someone he trusts implicitly to stand at his side. As his brother Loki, you enjoy his complete confidence. I ask you to aid Thor in guarding Asgard and protecting the 9 realms. Odin stepped forward and laid a firm hand on Loki's shoulder. His tone was earnest. If Thor must defend the 9 realms by himself, disaster is all but certain. Stand with him, Loki. Together, you will safeguard our people. Even for a god, life is never easy or carefree. Sol's days are filled with duties and burdens that weigh heavily on him, and without someone to share them, his immortal heart aches. He has Frigga, his wife, whose beauty, strength, and wisdom sustain him through countless trials, but the woman he truly desires is Jane Foster. She is only human, powerless, vulnerable, and living on a clock that will surely run out long before she can prove herself useful. Sol cannot fully accept Jane unless she offers more than fleeting comfort. Unless, at some crucial moment, she can stand beside Thor and turn the tide of battle, she will remain to him no more than a fragile mortal. Only if she demonstrates the courage and power to face a god's challenges will he acknowledge her as more than just a pretty face. Only then will Jane Foster earn her place at his side. Chapter 279. I didn't expect to borrow it. When Damien heard his father's true words, a sudden clarity washed over him. He realized that both the king and queen had been quietly watching over him all along, an unspoken validation he'd longed for. Though it didn't erase all his doubts, it loosened the knot in his chest and opened his heart just a bit more. All right, he said softly, meeting Odin's steady gaze. If there's any way I can help Sol, I'll find it. Odin stood before him, silver streaking through his hair, the weight of his years evident in the lines of his face. Damien sensed that this wasn't merely a lesson or reprimand. It was an assignment, a personal charge from the All-Father himself. Logically, with Thor poised to inherit the throne, the king and queen could have stepped back entirely. Asgard's strength would endure on its own. Odin's decision to involve Damien so directly felt, disturbingly, like a warning. But Damien bit back his questions. He couldn't bring himself to voice the fear gnawing at his mind, that Odin, the god-king of immeasurable power, might someday fall. Instead, he bowed his head in silent resolve. Whatever lay ahead, he would prove worthy of the faith his father had placed in him. Chapter X, Unlikely Alliances. Well, if you brothers stand together, I can finally rest easy. When Odin heard Loki's agreement, a relieved smile spread across his face. With Thor's strength and Loki's cunning united, the future of Asgard was assured. Even if the throne passed on and Asgard itself were lost, these two could kindle its legacy elsewhere. After all, a realm endures not merely through armies, but through the faith of its people, and as long as that faith lives on, so will Asgard. Meanwhile, aboard the Soul's flagship, Thor spotted Tony Stark and Bruce Banner lingering in a side corridor, still digesting the banquet's last course. "My father has agreed to lend you the power of the ether, for a time," Thor announced, his tone steady. Bruce blinked in surprise. "You're serious? Odin's that generous?" Tony folded his arms, eyebrows raised. "Hold on, Bruce, don't you two still want to study the ether's potential? Isn't that why we're here?" Thor's gaze shifted between them, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "Indeed you do, which is why I've come to discuss the terms." Tony exchanged a look with Bruce. "All right then, what do you have in mind?" Thor nodded once. "Let's talk." Damien shifted uncomfortably under the weight of all those regal eyes. He cleared his throat. "We talked it over, and honestly, our chances of borrowing the cosmic cube don't look good." Loki gave a wry smile. "As I've said, the ether and the tesseract are equally potent, a pair of prime magical artifacts. Their keepers almost never lend them out." Thor folded his arms. "Even I wouldn't risk letting an outsider handle something like that." Damien nodded. "So if I went to father myself, I'd most likely be turned away. We understand." Bruce Banner, who'd been listening intently, exchanged a look with Thor. "Trust me, I get it. The arc reactor's technology is on the same level. If someone else demanded my core designs, I wouldn't just hand them over, no matter what favors they promised. The best I could do would be to build them some armor, never relinquish the secrets." Tony Stark leaned forward, amusement flickering in his eyes. "And yet here we stand, Odin's court offering more generosity than any of us expected. Is there any chance?" Thor asked, his brow furrowed. Bruce Banner exchanged a glance with Tony Stark before replying. "Odin's ether may be vast, but it still isn't more important to him than the arc reactor I built in your head." Tony rolled his eyes at Bruce's jab. "True, my father's been unusually generous this time." Thor let their banter settle in, then grinned. "So, how long does your father intend to lend us the power of the ether?" Bruce raised an eyebrow. "You never asked." Sol, the liaison from Asgard, paused, surprised. Then he clarified. "The 9 realms belong to Odin. Lending us the ether's power simply means its source gets reclassified as a blue star. Odin can reclaim it at will." Tony crossed his arms, mulling it over. "Not bad," he said, "but don't tell me you're not a little impressed by my arc reactor after all." These words had originally been spoken to Damien, but when Tony Stark echoed them, Banner and Thor suddenly understood the full scope of what was happening. "Then the power of the ether will be entrusted to you for safekeeping," Tony said. "Do not lose it." At that moment, Thor realized his father must have anticipated this exact scenario. Reaching into his armor, he pulled out a small ruby that glowed with inner light, pure ether condensed into gemstone form, and handed it to Tony. "Rest easy," he added. "I might lose my connection to the ether, but I will never lose this." Tony turned the ruby over in his palm, a slow smile spreading across his face. "If we can crack its secrets, Blue Star will leap ahead of every civilization in the cosmos. But can we truly understand it?" Bruce Banner asked, his brow furrowing. "The power the ether represents, it's unprecedented." Banner had been hoping to study that power himself, yet now fear gnawed at him. He couldn't afford months of fruitless research, especially knowing that Malekith, despite his cruder strength, had mastered the ether with astonishing skill. Tony caught Banner's hesitation and gave him a reassuring nod. "For now, it's safe in our hands." "Right now, our top priority is to study the thruster first," Damien said. "Then, we'll examine the Blue Star battleship. Once we've freed up our hands, we'll have all the time we need to investigate the power of ether." And remember, our remaining lifespan isn't measured in centuries anymore, Banner reminded them. Damien merely smiled. The power of ether represented untold possibilities, perhaps even revolutionary technology. But his real ambition was to usher Blue Star into the interstellar era. As long as humanity could defend itself among the stars, and he retained access to ether's power, he could take all the time he wanted, even after joining the Void. That makes perfect sense, Damien agreed. Banner, catching on, turned to Thor. Thor, please send us back to Blue Star. Thor nodded. I thought this might take a while, he said, but with Malekith dealt with, we can return immediately. With the crisis resolved, the team prepared to depart. Thor raised his hammer, and the portal home began to glow. As the air crackled with energy, Damien exchanged one last determined glance with Banner. Their journey to the stars was only just beginning. Thor's voice stopped Tony just as he was making for the exit. Heading back already? Loki stood beside him, pale eyes earnest in the dim light of the ruined throne room. We never had the chance to properly thank you for all your help. Tony paused, glancing around at the collapsed pillars and scorched marble. Asgard still bore the scars of war. Thor ran a hand through his hair. There's so much left to rebuild here. If you stayed a while longer, you'd be a distraction, but in a good way. He shot Loki a wry look. Come back to Blue Star once you've dealt with everything. We'll throw you a proper feast. Tony cracked a half smile. All right, I'll ask Heimdall to send you home. At that, Damien, who'd been lingering in the corridor just beyond the doorway, drew in a steady breath. He'd been torn between staying in Asgard to help mend its wounds and returning to Earth, but Thor's invitation changed everything. Determined, he stepped forward into the ruined hall. I'll see you there, Damien said quietly to Thor and Loki. Then, turning to Tony, he added, Thank you, both for everything you've done and for giving us a home, even if only for now. Tony nodded once, firm and sure. Safe travels, Damien. He raised a hand in farewell. Outside, the shimmering heat of Heimdall's Bifrost portal rippled into view. Damien squared his shoulders, ready for whatever came next, knowing that, when his tasks were done, he had two true friends waiting for him on Blue Star. With one last look at Asgard's battered towers, he stepped through the gateway, the echo of Thor's laughter and Loki's soft promise of a feast guiding him into the starlit void. Chapter 280, Everything Has Been Sent. At around 3 o'clock one afternoon on Blue Star, a column of light suddenly descended from the sky and settled just outside Stark Manor. With a soft hum, Tony Stark's suit retracted, and he touched down on the manor's marble terrace. Jarvis 2, where's Pepper right now? Tony called out. Miss Pepper is at Stark Industries, the AI replied instantly. She won't be back until 6 this evening. I've already informed her of your safe return. Tony relaxed. As long as Pepper knew he was unharmed, everything else could wait. He stepped inside with Bruce Banner and, without missing a beat, ordered the chef to begin preparations for afternoon tea. 2 hours of uninterrupted downtime. This is bliss, he declared, sinking into a plush sofa. Bruce gave him a wry smile. It's great here, but I'll be heading back to my New York villa later. When Pepper's around, I have to watch my manners. Don't worry, Tony promised, waving a hand. We'll behave ourselves. In the kitchen, the clang of dishes and the whir of appliances sprang to life. Soon, an array of scones, delicate finger sandwiches, and warm pastries appeared on a silver tray. After the whirlwind of their latest mission, both men were more than ready to unwind and to enjoy every last crumb of peace. Of course, when you're a guest, it's only natural to be cautious, Tony said with a grin. Banner glanced at the dark, onyx-like gemstone in Tony's hand. By the way, how do you keep the power of ether under control? Secrecy is everything, Tony replied. Loki warned me this gem will draw powerful players out of the woodwork. I don't want to find myself suddenly chased by experts seeking its power. He held the polished stone up to the light. You can borrow its etheric power safely, no backlash, because its wish-granting ability scales with the user's strength. In the wrong hands, though, it could lead to disaster. Banner nodded gravely. Then you're thinking of entrusting it to Damien? Tony hesitated. Exactly, but I'm not sure he'll agree to hold on to it. He paused, weighing the risks, then added, I'll talk to Damien and see if he's willing. For now, neither Tony Stark nor Bruce Banner can safely study the ether's power themselves. so Tony insists on entrusting it to Damien. He's confident no one in the universe could pry it from Damien's grasp. Bruce hesitates. Why are you so sure? Tony leans back. Because the ether isn't just another mystic relic. It's basically a wish machine. Everyone powerful in the galaxy is going to want it. Bruce crosses his arms. Okay, but why Damien? Because Damien, as the current host of the ether, has understood its nature for ages, Tony explains. He even foresaw Malekith's invasion of Asgard. If Damien had truly wanted the ether for himself, he'd have taken it long ago, but he never did. Bruce's brow furrows. He knew about Malekith's attack before it happened? How is that possible? Tony gives him a wry look. Think back. Damien was the one who tipped me off months ago that nowhere, blue star as he calls it, was unstable and that a cosmic cube-level artifact had surfaced. He knew about all that well before any of it actually occurred. He's always a step ahead. Bruce stares at Tony, stunned. He knew events before they happened? That's impossible. Tony smiles darkly. Apparently not. At least, not for Damien. Damien's strength and insight are nearly limitless. It was no surprise he could foresee what was coming. Never mind, Tony said with a shrug. I'll just call Damien. Let's see if he'll hold on to it for us. Tony lifted his phone and dialed. After 10 seconds of ringing, the line clicked. Hey, Damien's calm voice answered. Instantly, a holographic projection of him shimmered into view beside Tony and Bruce Banner. Damien, Tony began, Bruce and I borrowed the ether's power, the reality stone itself, from Odin. We don't have time to study it right now, and something this powerful is bound to draw unwanted attention. Could you keep it safe for us? Tony leaned forward. Since Odin lent it in good faith, he clearly trusts you with it. As long as you've got it, no ordinary threat can wrest that power from your hands. Damien regarded them for a moment, weighing their request. He understood that Odin's loan of the stone was more than just a favor to Tony and Bruce. It was a vote of confidence in him. Understood, Damien said at last. I'll guard the reality stone until you're ready. Tony nodded gratefully. And with that assurance from their friend, the two inventors, one a genius engineer, the other a brilliant scientist, felt a weight lift from their shoulders. Damien folded his arms, eyes fixed on the glowing red gem cradled in Tony's palm. Isn't this the power of the ether? He asked. Tony glanced up. That's what Thor called it, and Malekith, who studied it for centuries, called it the same. But it's also one of the Infinity Stones, the Reality Stone. Bruce Banner, standing nearby, frowned thoughtfully. The ether and the Reality Stone aren't two separate things. It's a force that can rewrite matter itself, make something out of nothing, reshape entire landscapes at a thought. In a way, it lets you bend reality to your will. He hesitated, but on its own, it's limited. Without another stone to stabilize it, you won't be able to sustain large-scale effects. You could make small changes, alter a handful of molecules, but you won't, say, remake the world. Damien nodded. He'd never intended to keep the Reality Stone himself. Too volatile, too dangerous without the proper safeguards. Better to let Tony and Bruce study its properties first. If anyone could unravel its secrets and build new technologies, or find a way to weaponize it if they had to, it was Stark Industries and Banner's lab. All right, it's yours, Damien said, leaning back. I'll trust you two to figure out what it can and can't do. Just keep me in the loop if you discover anything unexpected. Tony gave him a half smile and slipped the gem into a specially shielded containment unit on his wrist. Deal. But don't be surprised if we call you in for field tests once we've made some breakthroughs. Bruce offered a nervous chuckle. Field tests? Let's hope reality survives the trial phase. Damien let them banter as he turned away, already considering the next move. Holding on to the stone now seemed less urgent. Better to have experts sift through its mysteries than risk another cosmic catastrophe. Damien stared at the glowing stone in his hand. It can really reshape reality? Tony shifted in his seat. Are there other gems with power like that? Bruce Banner leaned forward. There are 6 in total, the Infinity Stones, each one holding a unique, limitless ability. The Reality Stone is one of them, but it's actually the weakest of the 6. To make major changes to reality, you need an enormous amount of energy. If you don't supply enough power, it can only grant minor, almost trivial wishes. Damien frowned. So unless we pour in massive energy, it's basically just a party trick. Exactly, Bruce said. That's precisely why Odin agreed to lend it to us, well, to you, as a personal favor to me. Damien raised an eyebrow. He handed it over just so we could give it to you? Bruce offered a small, wry smile. No wonder he never set a deadline for its return. He clearly didn't expect or want it back. Tony grinned, nodding. Everything makes sense now. Damien folded his arms, eyes narrowing. If I lend it to you, wasn't it as good as handing it over? Once it's in my hands, there's no way he's getting it back so easily. Tony Stark leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. The truth is, Odin's not long for this world. He's on his deathbed. Damien blinked. Odin's dying? But you told me he's one of the most powerful beings in the universe. Even you admitted you respected his power. Bruce Banner stared at Tony. Are you serious? Odin's an almost mythical force. How could he be near death? Tony sighed, meeting Banner's incredulous gaze. That's what everyone thinks. But Asgard's own wreck, Ords, what I learned during the war, say otherwise. Odin's ancient. Time catches up with all of us, no matter how godlike. Bruce paled. If that's true, Thor can't find out. He'd be devastated. Exactly, Tony said with a nod. Which is why you don't mention this to him under any circumstances. He's not ready for the truth. Damien leaned forward. So this whole trip of yours wasn't just goodwill? There was another motive? Tony offered a wry smile. Odin asked me here, not only to lend my support, but to probe Kassadin, the so-called God of the Void. He wanted first-hand insight. That's the favor he's owed me now. Silence settled over them as the weight of Tony's confession sank in. In the shifting alliances of gods and mortals, knowledge and timing could be the deadliest weapons of all. In Odin's eyes, regardless of his personal feelings, he was speaking on behalf of the God of the Void. Damien, I hope lending you the Reality Stone hasn't caused any inconvenience. Tony Stark leaned forward. He'd assumed they were simply studying the stone's properties. We asked Thor to let us borrow it for experiments, he explained. We're not trying to get tangled up in any divine disputes. Bruce Banner offered Damien an encouraging nod. None of them wanted to play middleman between two gods. They only cared about probing the ether's power. Damien's expression remained calm. The stone has arrived safely, he said. When you're ready, take all the time you need to study it. He secured the crimson gem in its containment unit. Just one more thing. Don't lose the Reality Stone. Alone, it's unstable, but paired with the other Infinity Stones, it becomes dangerously powerful. Tony's eyes brightened with curiosity. Speaking of that, he said, what actually happens if someone gathers all 6 Infinity Stones? Chapter 7. The moment you hold all 6, you won't literally be omniscient or omnipotent, Tony explained as he adjusted the holographic display, but you'll be so close that reality itself obeys your every command. Banner's brow darkened. Close enough, in fact, to erase the entire universe with a single snap of your fingers. Damien stiffened at the thought. That's horrifying. Surely no one person can actually gather all 6 stones. Very few even understand the extent of their power, Banner replied, leaning forward. And even those who do know will find it nearly impossible to track down every last one. He tapped the floating list of stones. The Time Stone is under the protection of the Ancient One, the Sorcerer Supreme. The Mind Stone and the Space Stone are both secured in Asgard under Odin's guard. I'm currently safeguarding the Reality Stone myself. Tony nodded. And neither the Power Stone nor the Soul Stone has surfaced yet. Damien took a steadying breath. With Tony's genius and Banner's scientific insight at his side, they might have a chance of locating the missing stones, but time was running out. Tony Stark leaned forward, eyes narrowed with curiosity. So you're telling me that both the Space Stone and the Mind Stone are in Odin's possession? Damien nodded. Exactly. And I'm convinced that what they call the Cosmic Rubik's Cube is really the Space Stone in disguise. Tony's face lit up. You mean the artifact you retrieved from the Tesseract Vault, the one with unlimited energy and the power to open portals anywhere in the universe? If we could fuse that energy with the Reality Stone. Damien cut in, a self-assured smile on his lips. You've hit the nail on the head. The Cosmic Cube and the Space Stone are one and the same. And the scepter Loki wielded? That's not just a mind-controlling weapon. It's the Mind Stone. He tapped his tablet, bringing up ancient Asgardian runes and mission logs. Originally, What they call Blue Star only housed 3 Infinity Stones: space, reality, and time. Then Thanos handed Loki the Mind Scepter and instructed him to leave the Mind Stone here. That makes 4 stones resting on Blue Star right now. Tony sat back, steepling his fingers as he's considered the implications. 4 stones, each with near limitless potential, combine infinite energy with reality-warping power, and you've got a threat we've never even imagined. Damien met his gaze, resolve shining in his eyes. Or an opportunity to finally even the odds.